Good morning.
Good morning, Grand Rising. Happy
Yep.
holidays. Happy holidays to everyone. How are you, Jeff?
So, I'm all right. I'm a little tired. I've been working hard, but I'm okay.
I
all
bet a
right.
lot of people are tired.
Yeah.
The holiday
that
season
holiday
is
stuff.
always a whirlwind. It really is.
It's the winter solstice. The winter solstice is a low ebb of energy, and then it starts returning.
Right.
So,
Right. So it's like you're kind of pushing through, this energy that's a little bit lower, but
that's right.
yeah, we do it.
That's
We
right.
do it. So happy holidays, almost happy New Year. Gosh, can't believe I'm saying
almost
this.
Happy New Year. Yeah.
Yeah.
Can you believe it? It's going to be 2025. I cannot believe it. It's like,
I know.
When I really stop and think about how fast time moves, it's really kind of stunning. It really is.
It is. And then we always talk about how there's no time.
Yeah, right. And it just flies. Yeah, it seems like, the older you get, the busier you get, and you get more focus and you start doing more things. And, when you're young, everything's carefree and you're skipping around and, you could, you don't care about time. There's no time.
Yeah. Yeah. It's the responsibility that kicks in, right?
Yeah, I think so. That's it. The bills. That's right.
Excuse me. That's what kicks in. Good morning, everyone. Grand Rising, everyone. Thanks so much for joining us. Jeff, I know we've got the moon sextiling Pluto right now.
Yes, we do. We have the moon sextiling Pluto. We've also got later today a good energy coming in. That's going to stay up until 5:50 p.m. today, Pacific time. Of course, if you're somewhere else, the East Coast, add 3 hours. Midwest, add 2 hours. If you're on the other side of the planet, add whatever you got to add. But it's moon trining Mars. So it's good. We're in the fourth quarter of the moon. And we've got a new moon coming up here on Monday. And that's always a big energy shift, So this whole weekend is kind of you could say a time where you go in and you recreate and you rework. The fourth quarter of the moon, I always find, is reclusive, or you tend to mop things up that have been laying around, and that's one way to look at it. And of course, it'll affect everyone different. And the new moon is going to happen, in tropical Capricorn. So it's powerful when it happens. It'll actually happen Monday, right at about 2:27 Pacific time. And it's a big reset. And that's a big factor too, because Monday, we're right before the new year. I forget, when is the new year? See, that we're today, Friday, which is the 27th. So the new year is going to be right on next Wednesday.
Yep.
And we've got the new moon, the 30th, on Monday. So, it's interesting because a lot of events are going to be happening. I mean, we got this inauguration coming in, and now we're hearing on the news that, they're trying to stop the certification, and the attorneys are coming forward with insurrection, allegations against Trump. And again, I said, we got Mars retrograde, and it's going to stay retrograde until February 23rd. But the big one is New Year's Day is a little intense. So be careful with drinking and driving and all this other crazy stuff on a mundane level, because New Year's Day, we have moon conjuncting Pluto, and we have a moon opposition Mini Mars. And that's our nickname for Mars, Mini Mars, right?
Mars. That's right.
Yeah,
that's intense energy right there.
And boy, can you tell us a story about your Mini Mars story that just happened to you? Just tell them, how
horrible it's been. Well, it's over.
And then how good it got when it left.
It got so good. So Mini Mars was just hovering over my ascendant for quite some time, and it was very, very intense.
It was over your moon. It was retrograding back over your moon.
Over my moon, yes. And talk about emotion, and talk about dark emotions, and dark thoughts. No idea where these thoughts.
I mean, you look like you were in a cloud, This is so fascinating about astrology. The skeptics. I was going to invite Neil deGrasse Tyson on. In fact, the other night I was down at. We're going to be talking later with Myron Dyal, who's a really interesting guest. Yeah, really fascinating guy. He's been involved with the military, been involved in secret stuff. His father worked at Area 51, just absolutely amazing. He did telecommunications, But yet on the mystical side, and a great artist too, we'll show some of his artwork. And he and I were speaking about all this, and it was crazy, you know, because most people don't believe in astrology, you know, in the secular left brain science world, right? So we were down at Circadia for a dinner, and we ran into Bill Nye the Science Guy. It was funny because, you know, Neil deGrasse Tyson just totally debunk astrology. They think, you know, we're all wackos, right? But anyways, back to your story. I didn't mean to interrupt so much, but back to your story. I mean, can you validate how powerful that was over your moon? And I remember seeing Mars. Oh my God, Mars is going retrograde over a moon, because I would call you, and you know, we were having meetings, and I was like, God, she's really not there like she normally is. And you can tell you were just like in pain, you know. Pain.
Oh yeah, it's like an emotional pain. It's a pain with your thought. It triggers really bizarre kind of dark thoughts. And I was just like in that, witnessing it all and trying to get out of it. Excuse me. And it was really challenging. But as soon as that Mars started to go bye-bye.
Separated.
Wow.
Yep.
I mean,
it was separated.
It was like a celebration. I was dancing around the house. I was singing. I was doing all the things.
I know. I could see it. You were, yeah. I'd call you up and say, "Oh my God, she's bubbling again," you know. So yeah, and I mean, this is what got me back in the 70s.
Oops. We lost Jeff for a second. But yeah, anybody who's experiencing certain heavy
here we come. Sorry about that. I got this crazy mouse, and if I hit it the wrong way, the mouse won't work. So anyways, it knocked me out of the studio. Anyways, it just that's what got me going. My mother in the 70s, you know, you got to remember, I grew up, you know, cutting down trees, logging, you know, and doing mechanics work, and you know, riding motorcycles and horses and all that crazy stuff. And, you know, the last thing I believed in was astrology. And she comes along telling me, hey, you know, this and this is why you're feeling that way, or this girl will be this way, or whatever. And I'm like, come on, you know, I was literally, I can see why Neil deGrasse Tyson and other ones are like that. You know, if you're totally looking at science, you're not going to believe anything about this stuff. But once you start correlating events in your life, emotions, and various different things, it's amazing how accurate it is. It's actually so accurate. It's creepy. And I mean, it was to the T over your moon. You know, I see the same thing, you know, here in my family. You know, I see it. We all just like, boom, you know, just, it's crazy, you know. So we all experience this. Again, I've said where I've had fathers and mothers call me up and say, why is my child, you know, doing this or that? Or the psychiatrists want to medicate them, and we'll see these progressions match it to the T. It's absolutely stunning.
Yep.
Nobody cares about the good times. See, I never get a phone call. Hey, I just wanted to tell you how great everything's going. No, you only get a call and tell me when's this going to end, right? So
yeah. So well, I mean, we do want to get out of it. You know, it's intense. It's really intense. Well, we do get out of it. That's what's good. And that's what's good about knowing and following your astrology, because it does show all the ebbs and the flows and what you are going to go through on this journey. And it really does help to know. It really does.
Well, I don't promote astrology. I really don't. I'm actually surprised at how many people like readings, because I'm actually, it's really interesting. I've always been, you know, kind of the reluctant astrologer, and I'm just stunned. I'm booked for months, and people really enjoy it. I think what I enjoy the most about it is giving people a different perspective and insight. And, you know, when we bring Myron on later, you're going to see a really smart linear guy who has had both feet in two sides of the world. One is the mystical world of entities and, you know, angels, spirits, whatever you want to say, where he's communicated with. He's got this communication entity that he communicates with. It could be a spirit guide, it could be an angel, it could be, you know, whatever. He'll explain it more. But I've ran into so much of this, and that's why I wanted to bring him on today, is because literally we talk about this all the time, Ella, where we look at the constituent parts of the mind, and we find that our minds are really not us. but we're told
Right.
by modern society that's what we are. And that, I think, is what is such an attraction about astrology, is because people know that the mundane world and all the, things we get handed to believe don't answer all the questions. And, there's a lot of great things in religions. I'm not here to bash religions, but there's also a lot of incomplete things that have been taken out for political purposes, especially, in the first, second, and third centuries with the Nicene councils, on and on. And what's interesting is Vedic astrology, the ancient science of that, and Nadi astrology. It's absolutely amazing. I mean, you look at the timing of that, and we're going to talk a little bit about that with Myron later, how unique his chart is. Same thing. We looked at so many things on so many different people, and we've talked about your chart a lot too. But that's an interesting story about your Mars over, or I should say, transiting Mars over your moon. Absolutely stunning how powerful it was.
Yeah. And everyone will have that happen, won't they?
Oh, you're going to get Mars going around your chart every 2 years, but it'll never be the same way twice.
Because I've never had it like it was ever.
That's right. Some of your greatest minds of the modern era, like Tesla, Einstein, etc. They've many quantum physicists have talked about this, that we might be in some type of a simulation here. I always say the earth is where spirit manifests. It truly, truly seems to be. And it's interesting, when we exit the womb, it's first breath that is believed that the spirit is tied to the body permanently. So it's a very, very interesting thing. Again, you can throw a seed in the ground that's been sitting on a shelf for 50 years, and the spirit manifests right when the ingredients come together. And the earth is like a grounding rod. It really is. I used to work with a guy who was a very high level military expert in electronics. In fact, he was actually involved in World War II with the plant position radar. This is before Doppler radar. And I learned so much from this guy. And he probably knew more about electronics than anybody I've ever met, period. And we always used to talk about ground, how we would put saline grounds into these recording studios and film studios that would have hums, ground hums. And we'd literally put saline in these huge copper rods and networks of grounding rods. And all of a sudden, the whole thing would start working perfectly. In fact, I was working on the air traffic controller strikes for court reporting in Chicago back when Reagan had fired all the court reporters. And it was interesting because they called me up and said, we can't record anything in this building. And I did some research. I said, well, first off, you're on the 30th floor or whatever it was. And I said, you got an FBI repeater on the next floor, and you got a 50,000 watt, or I think it was 100,000 watt FM classical radio station. That's all they could get was, beep, 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 and communication codes. And I said, you don't have any ground here. So what we had to do is devise a very special thing. And why I'm telling you that is when you look at the left brain world and, science and electronics and electricity and all the things that we know about, and then you start looking at us as spirits having a physical experience, very interesting, because the earth acts the same way with spirit. It's a grounding rod. And Myron will tell us a story later about how he was, and this was fascinating. I was with Myron the other day, or the other night. We went down to Cicada, which is a very famous club in Los Angeles back from the 20s. It was built in the 20s, I think. And they have all these big bands in there, and, the stage, the old fashioned, kind of stuff that you saw with the big band era. And and it's right next to the Biltmore Hotel, which is very famous. The original, I think, Academy Awards were done down there in the 30s and all that. But anyways, we got talking about all this stuff. And it's so fascinating because when you look at what happens with the soul, and he'll talk about this, and that's what I wanted to focus on, is he said at a very young age, he found out that his soul was separated. And then I can't remember all the details, but he said that soul purification was completed right around 73 years old. Now, I could be off. He'll tell the right story here when he comes on. But very fascinating stuff. And this dovetails back into what we talk about on this show all the time, which is we are spiritual beings having a physical experience. And the reality that we all use in our, you could say, lower conscious mind is not us. And it's astrology really reacts to that, because I always say God created time so everything wouldn't happen at once, right? And I think there's an absolute truth to that. And, I have to say, one of my favorite diagrams, I always show this is, this is kind of, if you will, the division here between what modern science, or you could say psychology and psychiatry, would call the so-called conscious mind below, where you see the body, and above is the so-called subconscious mind. But it's so much deeper than that. When we start looking at some of the ancient texts that are absolutely quite profound. And one of the texts that I love, and again, I always talk about this diagram. This is actually a diagram that I created, and it just takes out the body. And you can see the lower conscious mind here is what we call the nefesh. Now, this might be a little bit hard to see, but if you zoom in, you can probably see it. And it's not us. It's the steering wheel, the gas pedal, and the brakes. Or if you want, it's the keyboard, the mouse, and the screen, to use modern terminology. And it's so fascinating, because when we look at this, we almost are like a chain that is linked to the upper part of the soul. The lower conscious mind was actually formed when we were slapped on the rear end in the delivery room, or whatever else they did to us, right? And little children, when you watch them, they're all learning. Everything's fascinating, everything's new, and so fantastic. That's why I love children. They're just so exciting, and everything is glee and happy and jumping, kind of like Ella when she has Mars get off her moon. But but in all seriousness, it's really an interesting phenomena to look at. And then you start looking at astrology, and that's one of the things that we're going to talk about with Myron today. Is he has a very unique chart. He was born with the moon just above the ascendant. I'll be showing that later. And he had Uranus right next to the ascendant. So this is not a guy who's going to fit into the linear left brain world. You're not going to put him in a square box. I'm the same way. I actually have Uranus very close to the ascendant. And I've always been a square peg in a round hole, or a round peg in a square hole, whatever you want to refer to it. But I've never fit in society. I've always been kind of a black sheep outcast, and always looking at society from a skewed perspective from what other people would look at. And I've really had a lot of blessings, because Uranus always tends to bring an eclectic, unusual life to a person. And that was one of the other things my mother exposed me to. She goes, Jeffrey, you're not like most folks. She goes, you got Uranus on the ascendant, So, and you look at you, Ella, very practical. You got Saturn in the midheaven. You're like a producer, right? And Venus in the
almost too practical. So
yeah, but it's good. It's good. It's very, very centric. But it's so interesting. And again, to the critics, I say, well, here, I'm not here selling you on astrology. I'm not trying to convince anybody it works. But I think if anyone who is of a scientific mind takes a look at the real astrology, the stuff that, to me, the real astrology really was happening prior to the 1700s. And it kind of went underground. And it's interesting how our founding forefathers were steeped in this stuff. And I mean, they were literally steeped in it. And I've showed many times how, our founding fathers, Benjamin Franklin, used to have an almanac and talk about, he would actually hide his capability. I think it was called Poor Richard's Almanac. I can actually see it over here on the left. And why he did that is he didn't want to be exposed, but he was actually writing an almanac, which would give, in fact, believe it or not, the Farmer's Almanac was born out of Benjamin Franklin's original Poor Richard's Almanac. So everyone who's reading the Farmer's Almanac can thank Benjamin Franklin, because he had a lot to do with that. If not directly, certainly indirectly. So really interesting that, our founding forefathers, again, I always talk about the United States Capitol. I mean, it's just literally it's laid out. And again, I showed this a lot here. It's in sacred geometry. And we find this in Egypt. We find this in many places, the cathedrals throughout Europe, especially in India. These sacred geometrical dimensions where they use the phi and the golden mean and all these ratios that would resonate with specific energies. And, I think this is a time in the world where we're going to see a huge expansion in consciousness. And we'll be giving, I don't want to let too much out here, but we're going to be giving our November update here next week. And I'll be putting that out. And one of the things I'm going to talk about is this powerful cycle that's going on with everyone. We have the nodes changing signs. That's one big thing that's going to usher in even more technology. The technology's already been here. It's been suppressed. And like I said, from 2020 forward, we had this Saturn-Jupiter conjunction, which was huge. And that, I think, has ushered in the new age. In fact, George Washington and the boys, I think they did know. I really do. Again, I talk about the mystical experiences that George Washington had. He had visions from angels and spirits. One was the Buffalo Calf woman that was purportedly... I don't know if it was her, but he had this vision that he was told to keep fighting, that he would win the war. And of course, against all odds, he did. And that truly was against all odds. When you read about our history of Valley Forge and how depleted those soldiers were, and then they made the surprise attack across the Potomac into New York. And of course, we know the story. The end is Cornwall ended up, surrendering. And we have the United States as we have it. So what's left of it so far. But anyhow, what's good is we're moving forward, and I think we're now in an era where the world's going to really change, and the astrology shows that. And we actually entered a 240-year cycle. It may not be exactly 240 years. Some astrologers call it 200-year cycles. But it's a 240-year cycle where Saturn and Jupiter join in a very specific cardinal sign, or new, what we call element, earth, air, fire, and water. And this, you can actually run this all the way back to the flood of Noah. And there's dispute as to exactly when that happened. Many of the geologists don't agree as exactly when that happened. They're somewhat close. But very interesting how the astrology parallels that stuff. And again, I'm not here defending astrology. I don't ever push it on people, but I always find, I think the most fascinating one, and I think you will agree with me, Ella, is interrogation and Prashna. It's probably one of the most unusual types of astrology. And people listening to that, they might say, well, what the heck is that? It's literally asking a question. It's not your birth chart. It is proving that the universe is an interactive consciousness between us and these things we call planets and stars. And, Myron will talk a little bit about that later, where a lot of these stars in the ancient books of astronomy and astrology, because it used to be called astronomy. It wasn't astrology. In fact, most of the good books that I have, they actually call them the books of astronomy. One of my favorite is Guido Bonatti in the 11th century. And that's actually, he's quite a bit later from some of the earlier stuff. And they would call it astronomy, not astrology. And it was the science of the light of the soul. And of course, that's what Vedic astrology is truly called in Jyotisha. And they would equate these planets to have archangels, angels, spirits, and intelligences in a hierarchy. This is why all the planets can act in creation, sustainment of creation, and destruction. And they do. They really do. And it's absolutely amazing when I study the Nadi astrology, when you look at it from so many perspectives. And it was interesting. I was calculating angels yesterday, and people may say, well, what the heck is that, right? And I'm probably one of the few people on the planet who calculates angels for people, but I'm probably not the only one. But what's interesting about that is I actually make now you can see that up close. Why I mention this is because what's been lost is the sacredness of astronomy and astrology in the modern times. Everybody runs around, oh, you're a Pisces, you're an Aries, you're this. No, you're not. You're a spiritual being having a physical experience, and you were concretized into your body as a little baby at first breath by an angel. And whether you believe in angels or not, I actually do. I actually saw two lights come in right when my son was born, and the whole room illuminated. I didn't see any wings, I didn't see any shapes, nothing like that, but certainly powerful. And I think most, Ron Howard said, he was asked, he said, well, what was the most amazing event of your life? And he said, the delivery room. And I thought, wow, that's right on, because I can second that one for sure. And I love that expression, because we truly are, again, everyone loves babies. And if you hold them, you can just feel that radiating energy. And there's so much more to who we are than I think what the world allows us to believe. And the Vedic astrology really looks at time as an experience of unfoldment of sequences that the soul needed to play out. And this is where we get into that deep, deep topic of karma. And all us Westerners, we get a little queasy when we hear karma, right? I know I did. It's like, oh, karma, it's got to be bad, right? Ooh, wrath of God, lightning bolts, all this stuff. But really, it is, again, full circle here, back to what we were speaking about before. The earth is a grounding rod, not just in electricity and electronics and science, but it literally seems to be a grounding rod for experiential time unfoldment that astrology shows. And I can tell you, I remember when I was a teenager, I had such a rough time. Oh my God, it was so hard. And my mother would tell me, Jeff, you have Saturn transiting the moon. And I go, okay, what's that mean, right? Because people hear this. And of course, many people listening might hear, because in readings, I talk about this a lot. It's called sadhisate. Sadhisate is a fancy term for the 7.5-year period where Saturn transits the sign before your moon, the sign over your moon, and the sign after your moon. And what's so powerful about it, and people might say, okay, well, so what, right? Is the emotions and events that it evokes. And usually the first one for most people is pretty tough, but it's not the same for everyone. Everyone will have this happen at least 2 to 3 times in a lifetime. Myron's going to have it 4 times. We'll talk about that when he gets on here. And amazing stuff, because what happens is, our linear left brains is always searching for some kind of a logical explanation for everything. A lot of times there isn't. A lot of times there's no logical explanation, and things happen out of the blue, and you scratch your head and you go, well, why did that happen? It's like you had your father leave at 3 years old. And why did that happen? And that was one of the first things I saw, Ella, in your chart. I said, your dad wasn't around. And you said to me, yep, that's right. He headed out the door at 3 years old, left a mother and 2 little girls, really tough, And I see this where people have these horrible events, or they may have amazing events. And,
right.
I don't think the parents planned it. I don't think anybody planned it. And their time unfolds. And again, if we look at electricity, if anyone's ever heard of a capacitor, that's a fancy word for it's a storage device. And they're measured in microfarads, all these different measurements. And they store electricity. Well, what's interesting is how you discharge them is ground them out. And the earth is a place where time unfolds. Again, I say God created time, so everything wouldn't happen at once. And the astral planes, which we talk about a lot, are so fascinating, because when you look at this, let me see if I can find this here real quick. One of my favorite diagrams I always show is this. And again, whatever God is certainly above creation. And I know I'm not smart enough to figure out what God is, but I can tell you it's very, very divine. It's like creation's raining down into this magical place of creation. And the Vedas talk about how there's not just this planet. They actually talk about how some of the Brahmic masters would travel from planet to planet to planet, and galaxy to galaxy, and universe to universe. And again, I had mentioned down here, it's a little hard to see on this diagram, but there's something called the Yetziratic worlds. This is where I think the Garden of Eden story, as well as many of the other stories and other religions of cultures, all talk about a war in heaven and God got ticked off and smacked the evil spirits down, and the upper spirits, or you could say angels, you can see the seraphims, the cherubims, and the thrones. It's very hard to see on the screen, but if you zoom in, you can. That's this upper world. They literally say there's 49 dimensions and 49 subdimensions in each one of these. And Myron's going to talk about some really fascinating stuff that he's been involved with this entity that he has conversations with, that met him as a little boy. Really fascinating story. And I'm going to let him tell it. But anyhow, when we enter into time and space as a soul, this is where the qualities, if you will, of good and evil seem to blend. And I mentioned many texts about this. One of my favorite one is the Share Hagilgum, or the Sharar Hagilgum. And it's certainly a very humble text. It was written by Rabbi Luria. And he humbly submits, I'm not 100% sure, but my master told me this and he told me that. And I love that kind of writing because, any of us who sit here in front of high def cameras or at a pulpit, if you will, and tell everybody we know everything, we don't. I can tell you, I ain't smart enough to ever figure this out. And that's where the beginning of wisdom actually might start, is we realize that creation is so vast and so divine. And this diagram, doesn't even begin to show. This final world's down here. I don't know if you can see my cursor moving. It's called the Seiya. It's the fourth world down, right above the earth. These are the astral planes. They claim there's 49 dimensions and 49 subdimensions in each one. Now, I don't know about you. I can't balance my checkbook, let alone figure that one out. And you figure that out, you let me know. And then here we get dropped into these bodies, completely wiped out and blinded. They actually say there's a mark right beneath our nose and our upper lip right here that knocks us out. That's the mark of silence, called by some. Other people say different versions of it, but it's to knock us out. And many of us, as we become more advanced souls, we start punching through that veil, that blockage between the conscious, subconscious mind, which Myron has. And I find he's going to bring up some really interesting stuff. Myron is such a fascinating guy. And what I love about this is he's been involved. I think he was working, he'll tell the story, of the director from Airplane, and he knows a lot of Hollywood people. Myron used to work doing all the installations for, he was vice president of a communications company, which worked with the RAND Corporation, which is with the government and DARPA and all that, and all the studios in Hollywood. Myron was born in 1943, so he remembers before freeways were out here. And he was born in England. It was cool. I was driving down the road with him. We went down the Cicada, and Camille says, "What did you think of Cicada?" I thought it was great. I said, "But man, I had the best time with Myron, because he's telling me, 118 was never here. The 5 was never here. All these freeways." He said, "We would just take Ventura Boulevard. This was a dirt road, So, and he's actually taken me around here with some of the old studios, Tom Mix and all the old,
awesome.
Westerns were filmed at, and a lot of these towns are dilapidated now, but we actually live right up next to Topanga Canyon, which is really at the end of Topanga Canyon, where Little House on the Prairie was filmed, Simi Valley. I can walk up the hill and look at Woolsey Canyon, and Simi Valley's right over there. And of course, so many great films have been done on here. We'll talk about that. But fun stuff, and it's just fun to talk about all this. So I see he's actually in the queue. I might bring him in early here.
I've got a question here.
Sure. Okay.
That I'd love to pose to you. And I want to make one correction. You spoke to your upcoming forecast. It's for January, the January forecast. You accidentally said November. You must still be in November.
Oh yeah, thanks for correcting. See, that's why I got you around. You got the good Saturn. See, I got the Uranus on the ascendant. That's why you're around. Yeah.
But
she keeps me in line here. So
it's the 2025 forecast that's going to be coming out in a couple of
2025.
days.
That's right.
2025. And so Rhonda, how are you? How are you, beautiful Rhonda? She's saying she's having an experience with what I would call mediumship, communication with spirit. Please ask Jeff if the sky indicates anything that is causing this. So, meaning, I guess, would it show in the in her astrology that she's
It's
having this
probably going to show
experience?
up more in her chart, but you know, to that effect, and you know, I started mentioning Prashna and interrogation. That's a great way to look at things, and I can do that real quick here. I can actually cast what
Oh,
we
pose the
call a
question for
Prashna.
her.
Yeah. Um, it might be. Well, I mean, first off, you know, when someone says, is something in the sky causing something, it's usually, you got to look at our birth chart as almost like a tuning fork. It's like a complex resonant chamber that has all these vibrational points that are excited by progressions and transits as we go through our lives. And every person is unique and different. I don't think there's ever going to be two astrological charts the same, especially if you realize that not only do we have all the planets moving like we have, but we're moving through fixed star groups. And,
Mm.
you know, NASA puts our solar system at just under a half of a billion miles an hour around the central sun. So we are all unique when we're tied into the body, because it's like taking a Polaroid snapshot of an extremely unique thing. What I would tend to say, looking at this, ask her what is she actually experiencing,
Yeah,
particularly.
what are you experiencing?
Yeah.
She's just saying communication, what she would call communication with spirit, but she's online, so she'll probably let us know in a second.
Yeah.
Um,
Something like that is better addressed at a session where I can actually cast a chart. And if I have a person's birth chart, you can really see resonant points that are extremely probable. And, you know, so it'd be hard to answer, but just looking at the chart, I think what she's experiencing is, and I think I've noticed the same thing right now. Mars is retrograde in the sky. And depending on what house Mars is retrograde in your birth chart, it can stir up a lot of stuff. And
mm,
Mars rules the ego and the drive. And it's also the crown chakra that runs through us. So it can have a huge effect. And, you know, again, outer transits and
interesting.
progressions are so powerful. And again, you know, all of us are going to be unique to what we experience with a particular
Yeah.
issue. But I know myself, I was mentioning yesterday that I literally have had some recall myself the last few
Yeah.
days of events that were just out of the blue. Like years ago, I used to deliver wedding cakes for my grandmother on weekends. I would help her out. And I was in the Elks Club, which was built, I think, in the 1800s back in Kenosha, Wisconsin. And it was wild. I had a recall of an event that happened. I had like a psychic phenomena there. An entity came towards me.
So wild.
And, you know, this kind of stuff is very real. And again, Myron's going to talk a lot about that stuff today, and it's very fascinating. I think all of us are capable of great psychic prowess, and this has been turned off. Again, I mentioned Kennedy. I love that he's coming in. Why? Because he's going to get rid of fluoride in the water system. They've been fluoridating us for 60, 70 years, and that's what we know. And of course, they're painting the skies. Not to get political here, but you know, we're definitely inundated. There's definitely forces on this planet that want to take us out. They want to dumb us
Oh,
down,
yeah.
and they want to keep us stupid. And
No doubt.
I think what's so amazing about
No
that
doubt.
is, yeah, for some reason my camera whacked out here. Let me just restart it,
It
and
did.
then it'll be fine. But
No, you're right. You're right. They want to keep us
yeah,
dumbed down,
they
or
really
they
do.
want us dumbed down.
Yeah, they really do. Well, there's certainly an attempt to make it happen. I'll say that. And you know, there the camera comes. So yeah, I mean, and all of us are capable of that. And the other thing is too, look what happens to children. Once we hit about 7 or 8 years old, oh, quit being, you know, that's child's play, right?
Yeah.
And sometimes children are so intuitive. You know, I always mention the guy, Dr. Carl Wicklund. He has actually had many cases where people had died and some little child would be espousing that, you know, this or that was where
Mm.
I lived, or I had this life, or he's, you know, had disincarnate souls who said, you know, I used to live here or work here, and they would go verify it and it would be true. And again, The left brain linear science guys don't want to hear about that. That's not interested. That's no interest to them because they want pharmaceuticals and surgeries. Not that sometimes those can't help us, but very, very interesting stuff. Dr. Edith Fiore is one that I always love. She got her license ripped out of her hands. She was one of my more favorite psychologists. And I think I have her book here somewhere. And she, here it is. This is a book called The Unquiet Dead by Dr. Edith Fiore. What an amazing book. I really encourage people to read that. And she was an amazing lady who would get people under regressionary therapy. She got sick and tired of the linear, let's write everything down that you experienced and then analyze it and give you our exalted opinion. Not that some of the psychological and psychiatric treatments that I've seen haven't been appropriate, but she took it so much further, and so did another really great practitioner that I love. And she's gone. She died in her 90s. This was let's see if I can find it here. It's called Freeing the Captives, and this book is amazing. Did I get it? No, I didn't. But here, I'll put it up. It was by Dr. Louise Ireland Fry. Yeah, here it is. I just didn't click on it right. I think I have to remove that and then I can put it up. But what's so good about this book, The Unquiet Dead, and also Freeing the Captives, is it totally addresses that these people aren't crazy when they have visions or sometimes psychological phenomena that is unexplained by Western. For some reason that won't come up. I've been trying to get the book up, but anyways, the Unquiet Dead is a great book.
I'll put all the books in the description.
Yeah, I think we have them up all the time, anyhow. But what they get into is these are psychiatrists and doctors who put people under hypnosis, and somebody else starts talking. Well, who are you? Well, I'm John. Well, John, where'd you come from? I don't know. It's crazy. We were out of ammunition. Last thing I remember, I was floating down this river, and now I'm in a place that nobody listens to me, and I'm very angry, and I want to get out of here. Well, John, you might be possessing my patient's aura. Now, this is talked about in the Sharia Gilgam and so many other ancient texts in the Vedas, where we can take on spiritual entities. They call them iburs in the Aramaic and Hebrew. It's a soul or spirit joining us. And it doesn't seem like there's just one of them. There could be many of them. And again, when we get Myron on, he'll tell you about some really interesting phenomena and things. His artwork, he channels, he does amazing artwork. He's got like 3 floors of art over there in his condominium. Amazing. He's won awards and everything. So, but yeah, it's fun stuff. But back to that lady's question, clearly,
Rhonda,
don't think you're crazy. You got to stay grounded with this stuff because you can step off the deep end. And, but astral travel. Oh yeah. Astral travel and clearing is a real reality. I do clearing. Not a lot anymore, but I might start getting back into it in the future. But I've done a lot in the past, and it's really powerful. And again, you really have to dig down in and grab the inner control of the soul. And I always loved the movie Ghost. The movie Ghost was, you and I've talked about it. It's one of my favorite movies.
Yeah,
and what I love about Ghost is there were so many truths in that. And, nobody wanted to do that movie in Hollywood. And the Zucker, the director who had worked on Airplane, said, I'm looking to do a spiritual movie. And he went into Paramount Pictures. And they said, this is the only one we got that we think is really good. It's called Ghost, but nobody wants to do it. And he said, well, why doesn't anybody want to do it? He said, well, because the protagonists and all the actors and actresses feel that, they really can't play a ghost on the other side. So they rewrote the movie 19 times, sitting around in coffee shops or wherever they did it in the Ventura Valley area. And finally came up with the good guy, bad guy scenario where, Tony Goldwyn's character, which was Carl, ended up accidentally murdering Sam. And then Sam discovers, and of course, Whoopi Goldberg's, and it's just an incredible movie. But one of the things that I loved was the ghost scene in the train station, which was, he said it the best. Here, watch this. This is so good. I love this.
You ain't got a body no more, son. It's all up here now. You want to move something, you got to move it with your mind. You got to focus. You hear what I'm saying? How? How do you focus? I don't know how you focus. You just focus.
See, and that, people have often asked me, how do you do clearing? Well, what he just said is so true. Like, I was clearing that place you had in New York. You had a store in New York. And remember, the chef was complaining, and you had a psychic actually come in and say you got an entity in there. And
Yes.
I was here in California, and I astral projected to New York, and I cleared that place. But what he just said is what you got to do. You got to dig in, and you got to get tough. You got to really focus your mind.
Okay.
See, and this is what society has done. They dumb us down. They want us thinking, like little kids are told, shut up, focus on your work or whatever, and there's nothing wrong with education and discipline. I agree with it. But on the other hand, the cultivation of intuitiveness or psychic work is suppressed as nonsense, and astrology too. They'll suppress it as nonsense. And I can tell you, our founding fathers found it very important to do things at a good astrological time. I always show the clip that, of George Washington. And, I think it was a ceremony that they had done for the laying of the cornerstone of the foundation. Yeah, this is it right here.
Right.
You can actually see that's not a hangman's thing. That's a block and tackle lowering the cornerstone of the foundation of the Capitol in at a good time. And that's only one thing. I hear they did it on most of the major construction areas of Washington. And again, this country, no matter how you cut it, it's been the power center of this world, definitely for the last 150 years or longer. And we've had a lot of forces come in and try and break it up. And we certainly have been seeing that a lot this last century. And George Carlin was right. Forget the politicians. You have owners, and it's the bankers, So very, very interesting topics and deep stuff.
Yeah.
But I want to finish before we bring Myron in. One thing that is so amazing about interrogation and Prashna astrology, and that is its ability to look at a question. Most people in the ancient world, they didn't have a birth time. They didn't know what time they were born. You'd be lucky if they knew what day they were born, let alone what hour. Yeah, you were born in the morning, In fact, I get that a lot now, where some poor person was found in a train station in Korea. Or I'll get that even here in the United States. Well, I don't know. I was, dumpster baby. They threw me out in front of the police station, and they didn't know even what day they were born. And the doctors were trying to extrapolate, by the bone growth, what day it was. And I would do my best to rectify their birth chart. And one of the most formidable types of astrology is asking a question. It's called Prashna. Or interrogation is what the more ancient term was. And today, astrologers call it horary. And there's many different techniques. You can use it in tropical astrology. You can always also use it in Vedic astrology. That's called Prashna. And it's just asking a question. Now, what's fascinating is even the greatest skeptics have to agree the probabilities of these showing outcomes like they do are amazing. And the only time I've ever been wrong is if I read it wrong. The astrology's never been wrong. And it's amazing how accurate it is. I could sit here all day and tell you story after story after story of clients calling me, oh, my car was stolen, my motorcycle, or I lost my jewels. You were one, lost your jewels. The incredible story of your jewels being lost, I think, is pretty phenomenal. Remember, you had lost these very expensive gems and you couldn't find them. And I cast a chart and said, you're going to get them back. And they're somewhere by heat. What was it? Almost a month later.
Found them in the dryer. Or somebody else found them, but they got back to me. Yeah. No, it's not.
Well, they were in a dryer next to heat.
They were in a dryer next to heat, just like the chart showed. Yeah. And it's not only about finding, lost items. You can ask anything. So many folks who follow us here know that, and they've watched you use the interrogation astrology. It's mind-blowing. It's truly an interactive
any astrologer. Well, look at Trump's last win. Okay, the media actually had me convinced that Harris had a possibility of winning. And remember, I went back, we cast a Prashna chart
Yep.
and said, okay, who's going to win this thing, right? It's all politics. And I said, well, okay, I looked at the chart and I said, well, looks like Trump's going to win. And, something really powerful is happening here. I was hoping it wouldn't be violence and danger, which it wasn't. And he won in a landslide. Whether you like Trump or hate Trump, he won. And the chart was
that's
right.
what the chart showed, right?
The chart showed, yeah.
Right.
And a lot of people said, Jeff, why don't you use this for gambling and horse racing? I've actually had guys who'd be watching a football game and they'd say, hey, who do you think's going to win? And I'd cast a chart and say, well, that one will win. And that's who won. So I'm just not a gambler.
Yeah.
But maybe I should be.
No, it's good. You're not a gambler. No, I think that's good. But yeah, you can use it for any and everything. And
I get stock guys who've used it a lot. Yeah.
Quite interesting. Yeah, all the financial stuff.
Yeah.
I just want to say, I know you want to bring Myron on.
I do.
Just want to say that Dean has a great question that I know Jeff is going to address in his 2025 outlook, and on the troops, and a couple other comments here that will I know Jeff is going to address in that 2025 outlook.
All right.
So,
well, let's bring Myron on. Yeah. We'll get to it. And again, it's hard to answer Prashnas on live like this or look at charts because it takes a lot of time. It takes a lot of time to do astrology. It really does. Even with the new programs that I have. My mother and I were doing stuff, BC before computers, and we'd literally be casting charts, looking up ephemeris. You get gray hair trying to do that. Trust me.
That's
but
awesome.
I mean, I'm amazed at what we can do in the click of a button today. It's absolutely stunning. The data you can look at and see. It's really amazing. So, all right. Without further ado, let's bring in Myron Dyal. He's an amazing guy here. I'm going to bring him on the stage. Hello, Myron.
Hello, good evening or morning or whatever it is.
Well, thanks for coming
wherever
on
you are, whatever it is.
This is Ella. So you haven't met Ella?
I haven't met you, but I've heard so much about you. And thanks for joining us today.
Yeah, I don't believe everything you say, you hear.
Lesson number
That's what
one.
I like about him. He's honest.
Yeah, right.
He's honest. Yeah. All right. So, yeah. Well, I noticed you were in the queue watching us a little bit, so I'm kind of glad you did that because you and I have talked about so many exciting things, and one of the things I want you to do is bring your background in.
Okay. Well, I guess you could start out. I could start out as a child. That's kind of where I started, and when I was 4 years old, I went into a coma, and I was in the coma for about a month, about 4 weeks. And they didn't know what the cause was, and they didn't have any technology that would tell them what the cause was. So they just told my folks, look, if he comes out of it, he comes out of it. He doesn't come out of it, he doesn't come out of it. And of course, back there then, they really didn't have any idea about how the brain worked, and especially anything that was complex. And so after about four weeks, the records back at Children's Hospital were destroyed. So most of this is anecdotal as far as how long it was, but most people tell me it was 4 to 5 weeks. And my brother did, because he was a witness. Actually, he saw me fall when I went into the coma, and he said I looked like a tree, and I just fell. And when I woke up in the recovery room 4 weeks later, there were people there, but I didn't know them. I didn't know my mother, father, whoever those people were. I had no idea who they were. In the corner, though, there was another person standing in the corner that I recognized almost immediately. And later on, that person or being would be called Charon. Now, that's not the boatman from the River Styx. It was just a name that I picked. And so I recognized Charon almost immediately. And she, he, or it, because it comes in those forms, came to me and said, be at peace. I'm here to take care of you. And so we went home, and to a home that I didn't recognize, to a room I didn't know.
So you didn't know anybody after that at all?
No, it was like I was adopted, and I went into somebody's home, and so my parents, were very, very hyper religious and fundamentalist religious, and I started having grand mal seizures almost immediately, within a month or so, according to what I've been able to ascertain. And they thought that was demon possession. And so I went through
that work of the devil. Yeah. Yep.
Yeah. So well, it does say one place in the Bible that Christ cast out the demon in the man. And
sure.
Later on, when I was with the Epilepsy Foundation, we got the Archdiocese to change that statement and take out the word epilepsy. So in the Catholic Bible now, that is gone. And they do no longer teach that epilepsy has anything to do with demon possession. Anyway, that's years from now.
Wow, that's I never knew that. That's really, so you got that taken out of the.
Yeah, and I was with the national organization on the Epilepsy Foundation board, and we
every time I talk to you, I find out more amazing stuff you were involved with. It's so wild. Wow.
Oh yeah, I was always involved in something, but anyway,
really were.
So Charon started teaching me things almost immediately, things about other dimensions, other planets, other kinds of things. But as for a child, not something sophisticated or demonstrative, but something that was specific to a child's understanding. And funny thing about it was that she didn't tell me about this exchange of souls for quite a long time, because I didn't know that. All I knew is that my mother told me that before the coma, I was one way. I was this happy-go-lucky little kid. And when I came out of the coma, I was a completely different person.
Yeah, that's you as a little boy there, isn't it?
Yeah, that's me with my dog and the ball there.
Yeah.
I did a painting of that picture, actually.
Wow.
So I was kind of on my own. I never quite understood my parents, because they let me go on these long walks with Charon. They didn't ask where I was going or what I was doing or anything. They just let me go. And I wouldn't let my daughter go anywhere without me knowing where they're going and all that. But they didn't seem to care. So Charon and I just would go on these long walks. And she has a tendency to endow me with information when she thinks that I can handle it. And so I might ask a question, something that is way over my head, like what happens when you die, for instance. And she's not going to answer that for a child, because it's just not time. And she knew what was the correct time and what it wasn't. So and it was a she and a he and an it. So if it was just a spirit, it would just be a spirit in my room or walking around with me. She saved my life on numerous occasions. One day I was walking to junior high school, and I was kind of blithely going through the universe like I usually did. And the light turned green, so I just started to step off the curb, and something jerked me back forcefully. And a car went right around the corner, running the light. Well, if I had stepped off the curb, I wouldn't be talking to you now, because that car would have just run me down. And I looked around to think who it was who pulled me back, and there was nobody there. So it was Charon who actually pulled me back. So that means that this being can interfere with my physical body by touch.
Yeah.
And
Wow.
and that's an incredible
Yeah, it is.
event in any kind of spiritual book that I ever read about. Well, anyway, so she became my sort of mentor, teacher, and also somehow she always knew the future. So either the future already exists or the future.
And she joined you, just so the audience understands, she joined you right during or after your epileptic time you went into the coma when you said about 4 years old, right?
Yeah, she was standing in the room when I came out of the seizure. I mean, out of the coma.
So you were about 4 years old.
Right.
Wow.
And,
that's amazing. In your astrology, it actually shows your primary, you hit a moon dosha in Vedic astrology right about that time, almost exactly. I think I was showing you that last night on the screen. But yeah, amazing. Yeah. So what you're saying is right on. Yeah.
Well, so anyway, my parents decided that I needed to have an exorcism. So I actually had 2 exorcisms to exorcise the demon of the epilepsy. And well, they didn't work because the demons didn't have anything to do with it. But so I had to kind of pretend and not let them know that if I had a grand mal, I had to go hide in a closet and have the seizure alone with Charon. And then, sometimes you lose control of your bowels and stuff. And I had to clean all that up. And now I'm like 8 years old when I'm doing this.
Wow.
But there was a kind of maturation process from the preconscious child to the post child of the coma, where that post child was much older. In fact, almost acted like an adult. For instance, I never listened to children's music or had any interest in anything to do with child toys or anything like that. And I was always interested in classical music or jazz or actually some fairly sophisticated books. I got involved with Lao Tzu at a very younger age, and the I Ching, and this is when I was going to church, and of course that bothered my parents no end. But
oh yeah, I Ching does not fit with the Catholic Church at all.
No, and then
they kind of frown upon that one,
to say the least. But the point was that the soul that had been transferred to my consciousness and was very old and was also very dark, and it craved a kind of darkness. So I had this juxtaposition between this darkness that was embowed inside my body and mind and soul, and going to church and listening to and reading the Bible and all the rest of it. And I never could quite make that balance work, because on the one side, I was very deeply involved with ghost monsters and EC comics. I don't know if you know what those are, but they were very popular in the 50s, and they were very popular with me when I was a kid.
They're still around. Those are collector's items. Yeah.
Yeah, I have about 50 or 60 editions. Anyway.
Wow, those are probably worth a fortune.
Yeah, some of them are. Anyway, so I was always living in a kind of dualism between a kind of purity that hung around all the time, and then juxtaposed to that purity, there was a kind of darkness that it's kind of like the Tai Chi. There's the black and there's the white, and I didn't understand it. I mean, I really didn't understand why I had these feelings of and seeing these dark entities that would be in my room while I was trying to sleep, or I would be in the backyard and I'd be playing. And that's
This is a painting you did. Yeah.
Yes, this is a painting I did of me in the hospital in a coma, and that other little boy is me as well. That's the me that Charon standing behind there, that guy that looks like a priest,
Wow.
would be taking away within a few minutes. And then after the little boy that you see in the painting there, who's sitting and looking at me, and I'm in a coma. When he leaves, I awaken. So that's what that painting is about.
Wow, that's amazing. That's such a cool photograph or painting. Yeah, I mean, I can't believe, did you paint this?
Yes.
How did you paint it? It's incredibly detailed and really well done.
Well, it took a lot of time.
How bad?
But we'll get to the art in a minute, because that in fact that's
Sure,
a whole
sure.
different subject. So anyway, one thing that did transverse the coma was music, because music is in a different part of the brain than the visual cortex. Because later on, when I was like 50, they would find out the left hippocampus had been damaged from birth. There was a birth defect, and that it was their opinion that was why I was in a coma, and why I was seeing other dimensions, other worlds, and that's their opinion, not mine. And
Right, science. Yep.
yeah, well, they always come up with reductionists that is nonsense, and all they're saying is we don't know. And but
Right.
anyway,
But they're doing it in a sophisticated way. Yes.
yeah, it's like it's psychobabble. I'm sorry, it just is. And so anyway, so music actually penetrated the coma, and that I didn't forget. And so I could go to the piano and pick out tunes, and when I was like 5 and 6, and then I decided that I wanted to play the violin, so I took violin lessons and then viola lessons. And so I play actually 3 instruments, and I also sing. I was singing in tons of choirs and stuff. And one of my plans when I was young was to be a music minister. So years later, I would go to Fuller Seminary, which is in Pasadena. But I had to leave it because it just wasn't speaking to my inner life. It just didn't make any sense to me. I couldn't put the opposites together. They just didn't work. And besides, I still had this dark part of my soul that needed assuagement. And so anyway, so time goes on, and like anything, you get used to what you consider normal. But my parents never accepted my condition or the kinds of visions that I always had. And it was a conflict right from the very beginning, and they beat me severely. I went through about 8 years of tremendous physical abuse. And now this is the 1940s, so even though across the street there was a nurse, Mrs. Amriant, she used to come over and take care of me. Today that would never happen. They would have turned that in so fast. There would have been a social worker there before you could blink. Yep. But they believed they were doing the right thing by beating the devil out of their son. There's an old expression, God save us from people who do the right thing. And
I like that.
So anyway, so I stopped telling them that I was having these seizures, and I would hide, and so I wouldn't get beat up. And I let them think, okay, I got exorcised, and the demons are gone and the beings are gone. But but they weren't. I mean, Charon was with me, and she came in all kinds of forms, angelic forms, and just robes like you see in that painting. And
that's an amazing. I can't believe how good of an artist you are. I mean, just absolutely phenomenal.
What's interesting is I never was an artist. I was a musician right from the very beginning, and you know, I have this belief that human beings have unlimited potential. It's absolutely unlimited, and you know, our brains works like an attenuator. You know, it limits our consciousness, and in my case, that attenuation was just blown to pieces because of the coma and my relationship with Charon. She would be teaching me right from the very beginning what to do, what to think, even though she would never answer my questions that were, you know, controversial about certain subjects that I wanted answers to, but I just couldn't handle them. And so anyway, so, you know, I started reading esoteric material even when I was like 9 and 10. I was reading the I Ching and Lao Tzu and Ouspensky and a lot of other people. And and that soul that had been placed in me was getting it, was understanding what was being said. Like it wanted to evolve. It wanted to be better than it was. And later on, years later on, I would ask Charon, you know, why did this happen? I mean, what's the function of putting another soul in a child? I mean, what did that actually do? And she actually answered the question. And I think the question the way she answered the question was that my previous soul, the first soul, was very mature as well, and was capable of handling this particular juxtaposition of consciousness, which is a very complicated manifestation of energy that not just everybody can do. You know, there's a scripture that says, many are called, but few are chosen. For some reason, I got chosen. I'm not saying I liked it, but the fact is I got chosen to handle this dark soul. And you know,
your astrology shows that. It shows it so accurately. You've got Uranus, the moon, and Mars all besieging the ascendant. What, Myron, I don't mean to interrupt, but when about did you really start getting these extremely conscious awareness that this was happening? Was this around between 4 and 8 is when all this really happened?
Oh, yeah. I mean, Charon used to come into my room every night. And when I was like 5, and say goodnight and hold me. And when my dad was beating me, she would take me out of body, and we would go flying on this black crow over these beautiful flowers on other dimensions. And in fact, it's in my film that I did called Charon that won the St. Louis Film Festival. But anyway, so she would take me away out of body while my dad was beating on me. And after many, many years of him beating me, I was about 13 at the time. And he was beating me really hard. And I was pretty bloody and on my legs. And he said, well, okay, have you learned your lesson? And, and I told him, I don't know what lesson you want me to learn, but if it's just pain, well, then I learned that lesson. And then he got really mad because I didn't give him what he wanted. And he had a funny look on his face, kind of like he had an epiphany. And he kind of looked at me and he went, whoa, wait a minute. I'm either going to stop or I'm going to kill my son. So he turned around and walked out and never touched me again. And
your dad was a really smart guy, according to your astrology chart.
Oh yeah, he was a genius actually,
No,
and
that's what it shows.
he had worked with von Braun at Area 51 and on the Saturn missile and all that kind of stuff. And
So your dad was in the military.
no, he worked for Douglas, but
Oh, he worked for Douglas, McDonnell
yeah,
Douglas. Okay.
and he was always being shipped out to places that we didn't know about because it was all top secret. Everything he did was top secret. So he never ever downloaded any information to us about any of it.
Weren't you telling me he had a code for dinner when he'd have to go away for a long time?
Yeah, when he'd call my mom and say, we're having spaghetti for dinner, and that's a code for I'm going to go away, and I'll be away for as long as I'm going to be away. And then she would just say, Dad won't be around for a while. And that started when I was like 8 or 9. That kind of thing started. And I didn't want to see him anyway, so it really didn't make much difference. But
after a beating like that, I'd agree. Yeah.
Well, I mean, the funny thing about it was years later, Charon came to me. I used to go to this mountain here in Chatsworth, and I was meditating up there on the mountain, and it was about 12 o'clock at night.
That's the one right at the end of Topanga, right?
Right. It's a very famous.
Yeah, we drove by. We drove by that the other night. And you were saying that. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean the Chumash Indians use that mountain as a sacred site. So
yeah, it's right where the Topanga Canyon and the 118 meet. Yeah.
Right.
The Ronald Reagan Freeway. Yeah.
So I was up there. Oh, I guess I was like in my early 60s at the time, and funny thing about it was that the animals that run over there's mountain lions and bears and foxes and all kinds of animals. I have this kind of symbiotic relationships with them because they never attacked me. There was never any negative interface with them at all. And anyway, Charon came to me and said, I have a task for you. And I said, okay, what is the task? And she said, you're going to have to forgive everybody, everything that has happened in your life to go to the next step. And that was very hard for me to do.
Wow.
And because forgiveness is probably the most powerful thing that can happen in the pantheon of anyone's life. Anything that you hold back keeps you right where you are, and you're not going one step further than where that anger is. It's just
the psychic lines of tension hold you like a moored ship. Yep.
Absolutely. There is no place to go if you're going to be angry and resentful and hurt and blah, blah, blah. So
glad you said that, because I talk about that a lot, and you're so right. And Karen was so right. We anchor ourselves and actually imbue the situation deeper. And that's what keeps us reincarnating. So right on. Wow.
Absolutely. So I said, I don't know if I can do this. I mean, you're talking, there's all that stuff with my dad and my mom, and there's all, because she used to beat me too. And there's all the stuff with the military, and, there's just a lot for me to deal with. And she said, you just take it at your own speed, but I'm giving you a command, and the command and an opportunity and a way out. And she didn't tell me.
That tells me Charon is really advanced, because there's an old saying, and says it in the Bible too, know them by their presence. So you got a really amazing entity there.
Yeah. So, she told me, look, this is for your reclamation and benefit and the soul that's inside of you, because I can't remove that soul until this last stage is manifest. And so I said, all right, well, I'll work on it. Okay. I'll meditate. I meditate every day for 2 hours anyway. So I thought, all right, I'll work on it. And I worked and worked and worked and worked and worked. And I just couldn't do it. And, so time goes on and other things happen.
How old were you when this happened? When she asked you this, how old were you? Sorry to interrupt.
60.
Oh, you're 60.
So,
Wow.
yeah. So the soul had been with me all those years.
And this was
But
up
by
on the
that time,
mountain by Topanga.
yeah, on Stony
Wow.
Point. Yeah, right.
Stony Point. Wow.
And so that was after, you know, almost 50 years of interface with this particular soul. And the soul had come a long way, you know, you come a long way, baby, kind of thing.
Oh,
And
yeah.
the truth was, it was ready to leave. I could feel the energy. It was actually visceral. I could feel it in my intestines and in my stomach. I could feel this negative energy wanting to be born,
Mm,
like
mm,
I was the mother of this creature, and
sure.
and the creature, this person, this being, wanted out. And believe me, I wanted him out too. But
Yeah.
so so anyway, so I was on the mountain about a few months later, and there's a cave that's on the mountain, and I built a little fire in the cave, and I did a ritual. For me, rituals are essential for my development. I do rituals all the time, and sometimes it's as banal as lighting candles, and other times it's actually blood and other kinds of activities that I don't think I want to go into. And in fact, I remember one time I was telling this therapist that I had of what kind of rituals I actually did on the mountain. And he said, well, look, if they bust you, if the cops catch you doing what you're doing and they bust you and they take you to jail, just call me and I'll come get you out. And
Wow.
because you're going to have to do these rituals. And so
A
that
lot
was
of the
cool.
old texts are full of this kind of stuff. It's really
I'm
amazing.
I'm sure. And
Oh, yeah.
so anyway, so I was on the mountain, and it was about 12 o'clock at night, and the moon had set, and it was dark. It was very dark. And Charon came to me and said, tonight is the night. And I went, well, what do you mean tonight is the night? And she said, it's either tonight or never. Now, statements like that don't come out of the mouth of a spirit guide. They just don't. Because they're not ever judging you about anything. There is no judgment from a spirit guide. They just go, okay, yeah, that happened. You know, we're going to move on. We've got other things to do. They're not interested in, you know, whether you went backwards, or whether you drank, or, you know, whether you chased women, or whatever you did that, you know, that would normally be, you know, frowned upon. Spirit guides are absolute pure love. So there's no negative possibility that they could ever have. They could never, ever judge you about what happens to you. So on a physical level. So she said, tonight is the night. It's got to happen tonight. And I went,
And what happened?
So I said, okay. So I was sitting there in a lotus position on the mountain in the cave, and the cave filled with water. So I thought, okay, that's all right, you know. And a boatman came. A boat came down this river, and so and the boatman signaled to me to get in the boat. So I went, okay, I got in the boat. Now, Charon didn't go with me on this. She said, this is for you and for you alone. So I got
This
on the
almost
boat.
sounds like an Egyptian story. Wow.
Well, just wait. So I get in the boat, and we're sailing along, and on the sides of the cave are all these beings that are still alive but trapped in the material of the cave. and they were bloody and screaming, and it was really terrible. And then as we approached the dock that we were going to land on, all these harpies came down, and they wanted to kill me. They wanted to tear my flesh
All
from
these
my
what?
body.
What were they? What came down?
Harpies. Harpies are winged females that are half bird,
That's it.
half, okay. And that's a kind of famous archetype.
Yeah.
Harpies have been around a long time. They go back thousands.
Now it came back.
Thousands
I just couldn't hear what you were saying. Yeah. Wow.
Yeah. Okay. So the
That's quite a
harpies
vision.
that I could tell that they wanted to destroy me. They wanted to just tear my flesh from my body, but something was preventing them from doing it. And I didn't know what that was, and I had no fear at all, and which is kind of odd. And so the boatman takes me to this dock, and the boatman didn't speak. He just pointed and said, that kind of like, get out. So I got out of the boat and I went over to this giant door. It must have been, 30, 40 feet tall, and it looked like it was made of bronze, but it didn't have any weight, so it wasn't bronze. So I opened the door and I went into this amphitheater that was just had thousands, or if not a million, souls in it. And they were in revelry. They were waiting for something to come. And in the anticipation of that, these beings were just going nuts, waiting for this creature or whatever it was to show itself. And I could kind of feel their energy, but I wasn't really connected to their energy. And so, all right. So within a few minutes, this being comes walking in, and he was about, it's not really a he. It's really kind of looks like a he, but it's really not a he. He was about, 16 feet tall, something like that. And it was the most beautiful thing I had ever seen in my life. I'd never seen anything that looked like this guy. And not only was he absolutely gorgeous, but he was absolutely powerful. So he walked right up to me, and they were screaming and cheering, and he put up his arm, and they just shut up. And he came over to me and he said, "Who are you, and what are you doing here?" And I said, "Well, I was meditating on the mountain, and your boatman came and asked me to join it, and I got in the boat, and here I am." And he said, "That was not my boatman, and you have no business being here." And I went, "Huh? What are you talking about?" And he said, "I know who you are, and you think that you're demon possessed, and you are not. And I am here to tell you that not only are you not demon possessed, but you've never been demon possessed in any manifestation, in any dimension in the universe, ever." And I went, "Oh, okay." And of course, I'm not internalizing, because I was so intimidated by this beautiful creature. And then it dawned on me that this was a demon. This wasn't just anything. This was a demon, and it was a senior demon, and whatever that means. And he said, "I want you to come with me." And so I walked with him, and he said, "I want you to go through the doors." So we went through the doors, and the boatman just came, like he had called him, but he didn't speak to him. So he must have been doing it through his mind. And the boatman came, and he said, "I want you to get in the boat, leave, and never come back, ever. This is not a place for you."
Quite a story.
And so I thanked him, and I actually felt a kind of peace from the communication that I got from this being. So I got in the boat, and so I went up the river and came back to where Charon was. And Charon asked me, she said, well, did you get the message? And I said, yeah, I got the message. And she said, so what message do you think it was? I said, well, I think a couple of things. One, I was never, ever, ever demon possessed. Two, it's time for me to let go of all things negative. So it's time for me to do the ritual for forgiveness, and I'm ready to do it.
Wow.
So that night,
so what a great story. Wow.
So that night we did the ritual of forgiveness, and I never felt so good in my life. First of all, the demon told me I wasn't demon possessed, which everybody, including the church, had told me that I was demon possessed all my life. And back of my mind, I always thought I was, because, if everybody tells you something, it's hard to just anesthetize
you start to believe
that
it
and say, well, that's, yeah, sure. Even if you don't totally accept it, it's always kind of there,
Sure.
And that was finally erased from my consciousness. And within a month,
you went into the subworlds of hell there, it sounds like. It really does. The river, that's the same story that I've heard in the Egyptian, Book of the Dead and all this. It's very interesting.
Right.
And people think hell isn't real. It is. And they're bound there by their anger, their hatred, and their inability to let go. So you're so blessed that there's a text called the Share Teshuvah. I always wish the religions could all just put down all their dogma and just get together with their knowledge and combine it. The Share Teshuvah is about releasing the soul from the anger, the hurt, the wanting to get even. It's like the Hatfields and the McCoys. If you
right.
keep, you go shoot my kid, I'll shoot your kid. And, the ante just keeps raising. And wow, what an advanced soul you are, Myron.
It never stops. Amazing. I mean, if you don't stop it, it never stops.
It'll escalate. That's right.
I remember Joseph Campbell used to talk about the pollen path for Native Americans. And he said, look, you're on the pollen path. So you're walking on the pollen path. And as you go, sometimes you get stuck, and that's as far as you're going to go. And after that event with the demon, I could go forward on the pollen path. And my drawings have these paths that go on perennially.
Your drawings are amazing. Yeah.
So anyway, after that, my parents were still alive, and there's I was
lived to be pretty old, huh? Your parents lived to be pretty old. Yeah.
They were in their 90s. And but they were not going to be connected to anything I were to say about that particular event. I knew better than to bring all that up to them. But I saw them right before they passed away, both of them, and I said goodbye to them. And
your parents.
I touched my mother. Yeah, I touched my mother on her forehead as she left the body. And I touched my dad on the forehead as he left the body. And then my grandparents were involved in this abuse as well. And about 4 or 5 years after their deaths, my grandfather, of course, died years before that. He lived to be 100, but he died, quite some time back. But I was meditating downstairs, and they all showed up. My mother, my father, my grandfather, my grandmother. They all showed up in a kind of ethereal form, and I told them, "It's over. It's absolutely over, and I love you. I forgive you. I forgive myself. I forgive the universe. I forgive everybody, everything." And they kind of turned this beautiful blue light, color, and smiled and faded away. So that book was closed. And that was just when I was like my late 60s, when that actually
I was
closed down.
just looking, when you were telling that story, I was just going back to your chart. You were just completing the second cycle of Sati Sate in your life. Right around that time, 2004, 2005, all in your late 50s, early 60s, you would have had a Saturn return there. And see, again, this is, I always laugh at the skeptics of astrology. I was one of them. And I look at, and that is one of the most amazing stories I've ever heard, especially the way you tell it, how lucid you are. I mean, that's pretty amazing, Myron. You have to be an exceedingly advanced soul. And that's what the chart and the Vedic astrology actually shows. The fact that you have these yogas, now astrologers call them yogas, what they are is they're planetary alignments that when your soul is tied into the body, you came here to do this. See, full circle, you're a communications guy. On the left brain side, you ran a huge telecommunications company as a VP, right? Am I correct?
Yeah. I created an avatar to handle external things, because most of my life is internal, and the external part of me is really an avatar. What the person you're talking to right now is not me. That's an avatar you're talking to.
We all are. That's right.
And the reason that I do that is because it's an extroverted way of dealing with the world, because you have to be. And I was a sales guy and a vice president, so I really had to communicate on a very, very sophisticated level with very big clients. I mean, you said.
You had worked with Rand Corporation, all the big Hollywood studios. I mean, you had done some incredible stuff.
Yeah, we had all of the studios. We had the Burbank Studios and Disney and Fox and Paramount and Lorimar Productions and CAA. We were with CAA when Mike Ovitz had just started it. And I became
knew Marty
friends.
Baum. Marty Baum was the old guy that ran that place.
Yeah, I used to.
He was a character.
I was friends with all those guys, and
I met him. In the late '90s.
Yeah. People are so used to being conned and used, especially people in power, and my intention was never to do that. And one night, years after our relationship had been severed, because they went another way with a different telecommunications company, I went to see him, and he had this new building at the end of Little Santa Monica, and he was a big art collector, and there was a giant painting that they had to build the building around. It was so damn big.
Now, who is this? Who was this?
Mike Ovitz.
And it's CAA.
And so, right. And so I went to see him, and he hadn't been my customer for 10 years, but I went to see him anyway. And
for anyone listening, this is one of the largest talent agencies in the world he's talking about. This is CAA. It's Creative Artists Association or something. Yeah, they're huge.
Right.
They
represent everybody in Hollywood. Actors,
else.
writers, directors, everybody. And
back when Hollywood was good, when it was good, had some dignity, right?
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
So anyway, this lady came to me and said, "You want some food and stuff like that?" And I said, "No." I said, "I'll have some coffee because I know what Mike might have some problems." So, because he's busy. So I was there about an hour, and then he came. It's a 3-level building, so he came out on the second level where his office was, and he said, "Come on up." So I came up, and we were talking, and going through the old days, and because everybody likes to reminisce. And so after about an hour of conversation, he said, "So what did you come here for?" I said, "Well, just to talk, Mike. I haven't seen you in years, and we were, when you were just starting, I was there to help you. And we had a great relationship, and he's partially deaf, so he needed a special phone to handle his deafness. And he goes, "What?" He said, "You didn't come here for any reason, any business reason?" I said, no, I came here just to say hello. Well, he fell all over himself. He didn't know what to say. He said, "Hey, we could go over to the Beverly Hills Hotel and have a drink."
Yeah.
And
so used to getting hustled. Yeah.
Yeah, because he's used to getting hassled. That's what
Or
those
hustled,
guys
right.
get. Yeah, right.
That's right on the corner of Wilshire and Santa Monica. Yeah, I go by that all the time. Yeah.
Yeah, you can't miss it. It's
Yeah, I've been in there. I met Marty Baum in the late 90s. He was right before he died. Yeah. Character.
Yeah, right.
What a character.
Yeah.
So,
Actually, all the partners were really pretty nice guys.
Yeah. They were
but
all right.
ruthless, make no mistake. You don't want to screw with them. They were very tough guys.
They were tough. Anyway, yeah, they were.
And I always treated all my customers like, no matter what level they were at, whether they were the president of the Burbank Studios, like Gary Pastor was, or whoever, I always treated them the same. I gave it to them straight. I felt I gave them as much chakra energy as I could, and I helped them in any way that I could help them, without wanting anything in return. Because there's something very special about giving away energy that you're not expecting anything back for on a return. You just give it away. I mean, there's nothing. It's so special to give away this energy, the chakra energy that you have, and people respond to it. Even businessmen respond to it, even though a lot of them are crooks and a lot of them are pretty tough guys. You don't want to be messing with them. But I never had that problem. So anyway.
Did you ever meet Harry Cohn? Did you ever meet Harry Cohn?
Yeah, I met him.
Yeah, he was a tough one. He was a tough one.
I
never met him, but
I had some problems with Alan Ladd Jr. But we got him worked out, and with Gary Pastor, who ran the Burbank Studios. But
Alan Ladd Jr., for anyone who's, just to give you the significance of what Myron's talking about, Alan Ladd Jr. is the reason Star Wars existed.
Yeah, that's right.
That's right. What's his name? Who's the guy, the writer of Star Wars? My brain's spacing out.
I think it was either Spielberg or it was the other one.
No. The guy who just sold DreamWorks to Disney. Not DreamWorks. Not DreamWorks. It was Lucas. George Lucas. George Lucas went to Alan Ladd Jr., who you were just talking about, and Alan Ladd apparently. George Lucas was turned down by every single person in Hollywood for Star Wars. What are you talking about? Star Wars. This is crazy. Get out of here. So he goes to Alan Ladd Jr., who was Alan Ladd's son, the one you were talking about. And Alan Ladd Jr. looked in his eyes and he said, "You know what?" He said, "I just know you can do it." He gave him all the money. And that's the reason we have the great Star Wars series that came out in the 70s. So sorry to interrupt, but I wanted to let people know who you're talking about.
Yeah, and they even co-wrote it with Joseph Campbell. Campbell was kind of the expert on mythology, especially the hero's journey, and Star Wars. The first film is classic. It's hero's journey mythology.
Yep.
That's what it is. This boy he's just a guy. He's working around and he's not doing anything, and he knows he has this
lost
potential.
His parents. He's with his relatives, and then they get killed, right?
Right, and then he connects up with a higher power, and
Obi-Wan,
a Jedi, right? And so that's Joseph Campbell's whole book on the hero myth, and
it kind of is. You're right. You're exactly right.
And that kind of journey is available to anyone who wants to take it. Now the problem is that it's not a comfortable journey to take. And that's why most people bail out, especially Americans. They're really not really prepared for the cost of what you have to go through if you're going to open your soul and expand it, because there are costs to anything that has any value. It's a little
Yep.
easier for Hindus and for
Yeah.
Buddhists. In fact,
They
it's a lot
believe in the
easier for
karma.
them.
Right.
Yeah, right. And they realize that this is all illusion anyway. So
And
they
they're
don't really
right.
worry too much about the reality of this. Yeah, of course they're right. And so, I mean, I've had so many experiences traveling to Zelkon, which is a planet in Orion. I've gone there
Yeah, that's
since I
fascinating.
was a
That's
child.
fascinating. Yeah.
Yeah, Charon has been taking me to Orion for as long as I can remember. And I remember one time we arrived on the planet's surface, and I was always barefoot for some reason. And I said to her, my feet hurt, and she said, "Well, then just get off the surface." I went, "What?" She said, "Just get off the surface." So I went up, about 4 feet. She said, "You can go as far as you want. We can fly over these mountains if you want to. We can do whatever you
It's
want
all
to do.
mind.
There's no
It's all
limitations on what that's right. That's right."
That's right.
And then one day we were up there, and I saw these pairs of beings like Charon and I walking around all over the surface of this area. And I said, "Hey, can we go down and talk to them? They must have something to say to us about their experiences, and I can talk about my experiences." And she said, "No, we can't go down and talk to them." I said, "So why can't we go down and talk to them?" And she said, "Because those are all you in other dimensions. And if you were to go down and even touch one of them, you would cease to exist." And she said, "Some of them are 1,000,000 years old. Most of them never lived on Earth ever. Most of them were 100 years ago, or 1,000 years ago, or 50,000 years ago. But they're like you and I, and
Wow, that's
so we
really
can't interface with them because of that limitation." And
yeah.
I went, "Whoa, that's really cool." So I remember one time I was minding my own business, and I was on my way down to an appointment to make a presentation. And I have this thing about being early. I just I have to be early. I have to be on time. I have this a friend of mine who was a really great
I
salesman.
noticed
He
that
told
about
me,
you. You're right
he said,
on. Yeah.
yeah. Well,
I
he
like
said,
that.
if you're late to an appointment, you're really telling your client that you're more important than the client is. So if you're
Yeah.
on time, you're actually giving them the information that they're important. So I was always early. So I got down to Slauson and off the 405, and on one side is a bunch of buildings that they built where they bought part of the MGM studios, which was my client. And then on the other side, there's a Catholic cemetery. So I thought, well, I've got 2 hours because there was no traffic that morning. So I went into the Catholic cemetery, and there was a really beautiful setup with a seashell and the goddess Mary, in the seashell, and there was water coming down, and it was really a really beautiful
Yeah, I
place
know
to
where
sit
that
and
is.
meditate.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I thought, well, I can sit here and meditate for a few hours. That's fine. So I'm sitting there minding my own business, and all of a sudden I'm in another location, not there, somewhere else. Now that's common for me because of the epilepsy that I have, and I'll tell you about that a little bit later. But the fact is that I was sitting there, and I was in this dark forest area, and again, Charon was not with me. Some of these journeys you have to take alone, and you have to take responsibility for yourself if maturation is going to actually happen. So I was walking on this field, and I could hear rumblings in the grass. and it sounded like voices, but I wasn't sure what it was. And I was going across, and I was running my hands over the grass that was almost as tall as I was. And then I came to the edge of the grass, and then there were all these trees. And then I thought, well, God, I got to get through these trees somehow. So I climbed up this rocky area over this one tree, and then down into another area. And all of my life, I'd seen these creatures with red eyes. I mean, all over the place. All of my life, I'd seen creatures with red eyes. Charon never had red eyes, but all of these other creatures had red eyes. So I was walking, after I got into this forest area, I was walking, and I could see red eyes all over the place. And I went, oops. And all of a sudden, out of nowhere, came these wolf-like creatures. Now, they weren't wolves, but they were like 3 times the size of wolves. And so they came at me, and I grabbed one, and I tried to fight, but of course I couldn't. And I tried to throw one at the other, and that didn't work. And they reached into my throat and tore it out, and tore across, and my face was completely torn to pieces. And they literally destroyed me. I mean, down to very little left. And then I was in blackness, total blackness. Nothingness is a better word to say it. So I was in nothingness, and then I couldn't see, I could feel a light, is a better way to say it, because I didn't have any eyes, so I wasn't seeing anything. I was feeling in another dimension this light coming my direction, and I didn't know what that was. And as it got closer, I sort of recognized it as a Charon-like creature. So I thought maybe it was Charon. And so it arrived, and she said, I've come to reconstruct you. And so she built me from a skeleton. She made a skeleton. She put flesh on the skeleton. She puts the organs together. She put my face back together.
And rebuilt you.
She completely rebuilt me. Now, shamans go through this all the time. It's very common for a shaman to be totally eaten and then put back together. The Tibetan lamas
go through this
too. She finished. Yeah, right. So I was totally rebuilt and changed after that experience. So when I awoke from this particular vision, I was at home working in my journals, drawing a picture of it. Pretty bad drawing, because I wasn't very good at the time. And
how old were you when this happened?
30s or 40s, something like that.
And all this was in the meditation that you had in the cemetery, right?
Yeah, well, just wait for the big one. So I'm sitting at my desk, and I'm working on my journal, and it's 5 o'clock. And I went, oh my God, I didn't go and make the presentation. I'm going to get yelled at by my partner that I didn't close this deal. And
because you went down there for the meeting, and you got in the meditation in the cemetery, right?
Right.
Yeah, right.
So,
right.
So I went, oh man, this is going to be bad news. And Charon looked at me, and she said, don't worry about it. Just don't worry about it. It all took place. I went,
your avatar did the meeting.
Right. So I went to work the next day, and people were congratulating me that we signed a $500,000 deal, because they loved the presentation that I gave them. They were impressed, and all the rest of it. And I didn't remember any of that. So in my brain can work on both dimensions at the same time.
Right.
Now, the vision was probably maybe an hour long in its totality. But then the movement, and I probably sat there for only an hour at the most. And then I went across the street and made the presentation. And then I drove home on the 405 and
But you
went
don't
into my
remember it.
study like I always did. No,
Ah,
I have no
remember.
recollection of that ever happening.
So that
And
everybody understands, what he's saying is he went to a business meeting and he went into a meditation in a cemetery, had all these visions and all these visitations, got torn apart, and yet his avatar, his other self, held the meeting and you had great success. Wow.
exactly. It happened in the military
Wow.
too. One time I was
Wow.
in
See,
I was in
let me
basic training.
just say something really quick. There is a book I promote all the time. It is called The Magus of Strovolos. And if anyone thinks he's crazy about what he's saying, he's not. Because this book, this is a book I'd love to throw out of helicopters and have everybody read before they die. This is about a healer who lived in Cyprus. And the author is a skeptic who came back on a sabbatical, who grew up in Strovolos. Strovolos, by the way, is a city in Cyprus. And I'll be brief here. But what happened is Markides went back and his priests, just like you, used to tell him, oh, stay away from this man. He's possessed with devils, bad, bad, bad. And Markides saw him healing people. And he said, my God, he says, you're for real. He says, can I write a book about you? And this is how this book, The Magus of Strovolos, came about, is he started following him around with tape recorder, pad, and pencil. Of course, that's before iPhones and all the fancy stuff we got today. And basically witnessed all these amazing phenomena of healing, out-of-body experiences, astral travel, etc., the stuff you're talking about. And again, people should read this book 3 or 4 times. It's stunning. And it's exactly what you're talking about. I just want to affirm to anybody listening, what Myron's saying is a reality that I think any one of us can achieve. And you said that earlier. But our consciousness is so shut down. We are so suppressed by the left brain linear world. And you've had the blessing of many reincarnations. You can see it in your chart. Your Vedic astrology actually shows. I actually did your Nadi astrology. You're probably going to live well into your 90s, and you're going to have an amazing epiphany, which you already have, when you exit this body known as what we call death, which isn't death at all. Nobody dies. Everybody.
No, there's no such thing as death. It doesn't exist. I mean, that's why. One of the things that they were talking about that Sufis and spiritual beings have is that they lose their fear of death, and the reason they lose their fear of death is because they know it doesn't happen. I mean, cosmic consciousness existed before this universe, and will continue to exist when this universe is no longer here.
You bet.
And
I got to show you something really quick that reaffirms what you're saying. This is a text that I've been enamored with. It's called the Bhagavatam, and it has the Puranas in it. And there's a whole section in this, you can see I've sectioned it off here, with the Vedas. And it says exactly what you're saying. Every 4.3 billion years, the universe is believed to just God pulls it in. God just yanks in the whole creation and recreates it again. And all the scientists are running around. What do they say about the Earth? Well, the Earth is about 4 billion years old, So it's very interesting. These ancient texts say the same thing, and the same thing you're saying, and that is nobody dies. We are a fragmentation of divinity, and it's raining down continuously. And that vision you talked about earlier is so amazing about the bloodied souls in the cave walls. Remember when it is so fascinating. You had that on Topanga. I used to live right next to El Scorpion, that peak that's right in El Scorpion Park. For anybody listening to me, this is off of Valley Circle Boulevard up in the end of, it's right south of Thousand Oaks, California. It's right next to Calabasas. And the Indians used to say that was a pillar that would hold up this dimensional reality in this sector. Have you heard anything about that?
Yeah, well, that my brother was married to Ellen Gear, and who's Will Gear's daughter.
Oh, wow.
And Will Gear's an actor, and he was on the Waltons, and he's done hundreds of films and plays. In fact, he played Walt Whitman on Broadway. He actually memorized the entire Leaves of Grass, which is like an incredible feat. but
Yeah,
that was Will. He was that kind of guy. Well, anyway, so
yeah.
my brother married into that family, and I used to write music for Theater Britannicum, which still exists in Topanga Canyon. Because when he was blackballed by the House Un-American Activities, he decided, he said, hey, I can do Aeschylus, Euripides, Shakespeare. I can do anything I want in this theater. So he created Theater Britannicum. And then they did these productions. And
it's
I
still
wrote
there.
music
It's
for,
still on Topanga
for that.
Boulevard. Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Ellen has made it even more successful than it was when Will was running it. And
I think I was
Will
in it
knew
not
everybody.
too long
There
ago.
wasn't
I
anybody
heard a
that-
talk in there. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean,
Amazing.
anyway, I guess my point was that Topanga Canyon itself is famous for spooky stuff that has been going on there perennially. I mean, it's really spooky stuff that's been going there.
Oh,
and,
yeah. Remember,
and
I
of
was
course,
telling you the story
jazz
about
story-
Dr. Carl Wickland? Yeah, in Topanga. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
Amazing.
And that was before the rich have moved in and started, bulldozing everything and building giant houses. But I remember one guy lived in a boxcar. In fact, Oliver Sacks lived in Topanga Canyon, and
oh, wow.
he was a neurologist who wrote a lot of great books, and he had a very interesting. He and I were talking a lot before his death, and because he used to have experiences like mine. Like one morning he was making breakfast. He was just making breakfast, cooking, and his friend showed up. And he said, okay, I'll make you breakfast too. There was just two of them. And so he said, what do you want? And they told him. And so he took the eggs and stuff and he put them on the table for his two friends who were sitting right there. And then all of a sudden they weren't there because they were never there. Now in his case, he had been taking all kind of psychotropic drugs for experimental purposes. He was a graduate student at UCLA at the time before he had got his PhD and in neurology. And
Cary Grant experimented with a lot of that stuff too.
Oh yes. Oh yes. Yep. In fact, there's so many people that have experimented. The problem is when people play with these drugs, there is real risk. And then, of course, they don't follow up on it. Nobody ever said this was easy. And nobody ever said that if you want to get into it, that your ego is not going to get just crushed like a walnut. I mean, there is no way that if you see the eternal bliss that exists in the universe, you're going to feel ever again that important. You're just not.
Right.
Well,
yes, we are very myopic.
I remember one time Karen took me to the edge of the universe, as she called it, and we were on the mountain, and she said, "Come on, let's go. I'm going to take you to the edge of the universe." And I went, "Okay, all right." So we go out on this huge, gigantic black plain, and there's a river, but it's not water, it's energy. And it separates one side of the universe from the other. And because I said, is that water? What is that? And she said, no, it's not water, it's eternal energy.
Just like Thor.
It has
like
always
the dimensions
been,
in Thor. Yeah.
Right. It has always been, and it'll always be. And I said, well, can we cross that or go into it? And she said, no, you absolutely cannot cross that or go into it, because if you cross it now, you will never come back. You will go on into that other dimension. So if you want to see your daughter again, then I would suggest you stay on this side of the river. I just wanted to show you that particular barrier that people pass through and over.
Wow.
And it's
so amazing, Myron, for you to tell this to people. He's talking about stuff that's talked about in the Vedas, where literally there's these Brahmic You're an old Brahmin, I think. I really do. I think you're just a very advanced soul, where they could go through these different universes and planets and galaxies. Absolutely stunning.
Well, you know, and there's also a strange sound in the universe. There's like a hum, and it's very powerful. And it's, at first you think, am I hearing a sound or not? And then you think, well, that can't be a sound. And then you're going,
it reminds
wait a
me of
minute.
the Who. Did you ever hear of the Who sound? Yeah.
Yeah.
It's
And so you start feeling the vibration in your body. You know, almost all visceral spiritual experiences affect the body in some way. It either affects the solar plexus or whatever chakra it's going to go into. It picks that chakra. If it's your heart chakra, then that's where the energy goes. It goes to your heart chakra. If it's in the crown chakra, then it goes there. And this musical sound, I think it's a B flat, if you want to know the truth. I have almost absolute pitch. So, and I also have synesthesia. I don't know if you know what that is, but synesthesia is a well, it's a neurological condition. So when I hear B flat, I see blue. And if you look at my paintings, you'll see a lot of blue in my paintings. Yeah, so blue is my color.
Yeah, I see that.
It's in every painting. Every painting I've ever done, there's blue there. So,
yeah, I see that. Yeah, you're right. Wow.
So, so when I used to play in orchestras and all that, because I was a musician for years and played in orchestras all over the place. I even played on a Frank Sinatra session one time. And he was. Was
he there? Was Frank Sinatra there?
Oh yeah, he always recorded live with an audience. Always, even if it was 12 people. And
so you were playing with Frank Sinatra.
Yeah, I got the gig through a friend of mine who was a friend of Nelson Reynolds, and they needed a viola player to fill in. So I got the gig to fill in. And I was sitting in the back of the room, and Sinatra was a really
every time I talk to you, Myron, I hear more stuff.
He heard. Well, you know, I had a big life, if you want to look at it. I had 8 decades here, so I've got a lot of stuff to talk about. But but anyway, it was an amazing experience with this sound from the universe, and I hear it from time to time. All of a sudden, it's just there. And at first, I just thought, well, okay, this is just another neurological condition, and I asked my neurologist about it. And since they don't know shit about it, they are pretty useless, actually. Now I'm getting kind of tough on them, but the fact is that they never discovered, they didn't discover that I had a brain tumor until I was 50. And even that was an interesting synchronicity, because I had joined the Epilepsy Foundation, and in order to join the foundation, you've got to do one of 3 things. Either you give them money. That's the way boards work. You either give them money, time, or
pretty much everyone.
Yeah, right. So one of the board members was Jim Abrams. Of course, I told you about Airplane and all that kind of stuff. And then we did that film.
He was the director of that,
Yeah, right. Yeah. And but there was a girl there that worked at LA Times, and she was a reporter, and she said, you know, I have a connection that might be able to give you some light on whether you're an epileptic or not, because there was some doubt about it. A lot of the neurologists thought it was an advanced form of migraine, because there's more hallucinations in migraine than there is in epilepsy. And I sort of bought that, and then I thought, wait a minute, this is more complicated than that. There's just something wrong with that. So I said, okay, if you can set this up, I'd love to do it. So there's a research center at UCLA. They don't see patients. All they do is research, and people from all over the world come to this research center at UCLA to study epilepsy. And so she got me an appointment with the guy, the big man. And you don't even see him at first. 3 other doctors interview you before you get to him. And they ask you questions and they write down all the data and material and all that kind of stuff. And then he comes in, kind of like, any guru. He comes in and he was looking through all my charts and all the stuff that Kaiser had given them and everything. And he goes, sure. I don't see anything here that would say that you have epilepsy. There's just nothing here. On all of the MRIs they did, there's just nothing here. How did they make this diagnosis? And I said, doctor, you're the doctor. You tell me. They say I have epilepsy. Yeah. And they give me epileptic medications. You're supposed to be the expert. You tell me. I mean, you read the charts. And he said, well, I want to do some tests. And these tests are not available to the normal public. You cannot buy these tests. You have to be invited by this group. So
sure.
They did two tests. One was with the venal system, because the brain, the blood goes through the brain and it can cause all kinds of seizures. And the other one was a deep, complicated slicing of the data of the brain. And so they ran the tests, and I went back to UCLA to talk to the person who was going to give me the answer. So I walked in and I was ready with my pontificating statement, I think it's migraine and, blah, 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 blah. I was shooting my mouth off. And she said, just wait a minute. And she turned the screen around and she said, you see this right here? I actually have a picture of it. She said, you see this right here? This is a tumor, and you've had this forever. It's a birth defect. And it's in your left hippocampus, and it affects visual memory specifically. So it is the scientific explanation on why I could be in 2 dimensions at the same time, two states of consciousness, if you will. Yep. If you wanted to get real scientific about it, I can play that card. Depending on who the audience is, I play that card if they get real spooky about this guy seeing visions and he's, is he nuts? And so I play the epilepsy thing and the left hippocampus damage and the fact that it affects visual memory. That what happens is that the left brain actually takes in all the information and then it downloads it to the right brain that actually puts it in any kind of form. And then it pushes it out your eye. That's how you see. Well, if there's something that interferes with that, then you don't see what your the data you're getting from your left brain isn't giving you what you're actually looking at, because the eyes don't see. They're just passive, and so the data is downloaded into the hippocampus. So
fascinating how complex the body is. Yeah.
Yeah, it's interesting is that with all of the neurologists that I met, maybe 100, and these are the most famous guys in the world, in the national organization. We used to have an annual meeting every year. And none of them could explain how I could have a seizure. A seizure can only last 5 minutes or less. If it goes more than 5 minutes, you're dead. That's it. Because what happens with a seizure is your electrical system breaks. And then if it doesn't come back together, you're gone. You're not going to come back from it. So,
I didn't know that. Wow.
So anyway, so I was trying to, I got them liquored up at dinners to see if I could get some information out of them that they didn't want to. Yeah. They didn't want to tell me because they thought I might pass it on to. Yeah, right. Yeah. And they had heard and read the summary that this doctor had done at UCLA, and they copped to the fact that they don't know what this is.
Right. There you go.
They don't. How could I be out 8 hours how could I have done what I did in that one story I told you about when I went to the cemetery? How could that
Sure.
take place? That's not a seizure. The seizure
And
is
you
only
literally completed a presentation and got success at the same time.
That's right. So
Yeah.
so
Amazing.
now Jung used to call that
Yeah,
the
Carl Jung, I
companion.
love Carl Jung.
And he had a companion like Charon. He called it Philemon, and it's in the Red Book. It's in
That's
the
right.
famous Red Book. He wrote about it.
For anybody
And he
listening,
believed in
Carl
the
Jung is the famous psychiatrist who basically separated from Freud because he believed in astrology and he believed in all the stuff Myron's talking about. Stunning. I love Jung. Yep.
And alchemy too. I mean,
And alchemy.
the book
That's right.
Psychology and Alchemy and the alchemical studies, they're very complicated, but they're worth reading if you can get through them. I mean,
So
they
is
are tough
synchronicity.
stuff.
Yep.
But
yeah, deep stuff.
Yeah. So I was a big fan of Jung's for a long, long time. But at some point you have to kill the Buddha. I mean, you just have to. Otherwise, I just become a Jungian. And I'm not interested in following anyone except my own energy. So, and that's Charon and Charon's connection. And
you dip into the knowledge, take it, and assimilate it. Yep.
Exactly. The only book I still use on a regular basis is the I Ching. That's the only one. And ironically enough, my ex-wife.
Oh, the Catholics hate that one.
Joy.
Yeah, work of the devil.
Oh yeah, sure. She's directly.
The Masons are too, by
descended.
the way. Yeah.
Well, yeah, and I am a Mason, by the way. My grandfather was a Freemason. Yeah, and I have his sword and all that stuff. His name is on the sword when he was a Freemason.
Manly P. Hall was too.
And
I remember I met Manly in the 80s, and he was an amazing guy. Yeah.
I remember when I was a kid, my best friend, and Mrs. Amiot's, the lady that used to take care of me when I would have seizures, they moved to San Jose. So I would get on the train. I was about 10 or 11 or 12, something like that. And I'd get on the train and I would go up to San Jose. And
that's back in the 50s. Yeah.
Yeah, right. And there's a very famous.
You didn't even have a freeway back then. You had to take the train. Yeah.
No,
the
right.
5 didn't exist in 1950. Yeah. Or 53. Yeah.
There's a famous Freemason museum it's an Egyptian museum. And in San Jose, and it's spectacular. And anytime I get around archetypal imagery, I don't care whether it's Egyptian, Greek,
you bet.
American Indian, Native American, I don't care what it is. Yeah. Once I go into it, I'm in it. So it isn't that I become them. It's just that I am so absorbed by that energy.
Have you been in the Masonic temple down on Wilshire where Bobby Kennedy got killed right across the street from there? Yeah, that one too.
Yeah.
Amazing.
Amazing. Yeah. And like one time I did a show in Victoria in Canada at the university there. And
as a musician?
No, an art show. And I've done art shows all over the world.
Yeah.
And so I was looking. We went into this part of the museum that had all of this Native American, Alaskan kind of art that was just spectacular. I mean, the carvings of the animals and the totems and the boats they had tons of stuff. And I told my wife at the time, I said, "Look, you're just going to have to go do something because I can't walk away from this until I internalize what I'm looking at." And so 3 or 4 hours later, I still wasn't ready to leave, but I thought I better leave. And but I could feel exactly what they were feeling at the level that they were living at, because actually those levels are ubiquitous. They're on the same level as anybody is. I mean, the technology has nothing to do with these levels. So these shamans that were creating these images were in the same place that I was in when I was creating my images.
Yeah.
Because
Wow.
I started art after I was hurt in the military. I couldn't do my music anymore. The only thing I can still do is sort of play the piano, but I can't play the violin anymore or the viola. So Charon came to me and said, okay, we're going to start doing art. And I went, wait a minute. I'm not an artist. You know, I didn't study art in college. You know, I'm not an artist. And she said, just go get a book, a small book, and start writing and drawing. So I went, okay, all right, okay. So I got a small book, and I was writing and making stick drawings. That's all I could do. And
well, you've come a long way from that, buddy. I'll tell you that.
Well, within just a few years, there's 7,000 images to my right.
I mean,
here
look at the quality of your work. It's stunning. It's absolutely stunning. No.
Yeah,
I love this one here too. I love this with the angels.
Yeah, that's actually, both of those are me.
Wow.
So we're one thing. That's Charon and I as one thing. That's why she has one part of the wing and I have the other part, is because we're really one thing. We're not two things. In this drawing, in this painting, we're two things.
Sure.
And the roses represent life. And you'll see roses in most of those paintings. And white roses represent death. Yeah, but the red roses represent life and transliteration of energy in my iconography. And,
yeah, it's really interesting. You know, go ahead.
No, go ahead.
Well, it's interesting. You brought up before when you were walking and you felt the place psychically where the indigenous Indians were when they created their art. And of course, that's where you go. And, you know, I always say, you know, the Westerns always depict the indigenous Indians as these savages. You know, they were horrible. Well, when you look at our Constitution, which was, you know, again, brought by our founding fathers, they consulted the so-called savages, the Iroquois and other tribes, you know, and I've got many clients who deal with many different Indian cultures, which is very advanced in this knowledge that you're speaking about here today. You know, astral travel, the worlds beyond the so-called grave, and all these things. It's really, you know, amazing how advanced they were. And people think this is, you know, they're just a bunch of barbarians wearing headdresses. It's so far from the truth. And, you know, our left brain world is so removed from the way the universe is, and it really is. You know, it's
ego arrogance is what it is, and it's fear of letting go. You know, I think
that's exactly right.
If you can let go of all of these things that you think you are, which you're not, and just embrace the eternal forever, not to be metaphorically poetic.
No,
but
you're right.
If you can embrace that energy, then all of that stuff becomes unimportant. You know, money, position, power, all that stuff. What comes to you comes to you. You know, like, not in my wildest dreams that I ever think that I would ever become an artist. My brother was the artist. He went to art school. I went to music school. Right. And who would have thought that my art would have been shown all over the world, and
it's amazing stuff.
And that I would have been
beyond.
So successful in the art world, because the art world is closed like any other world. And if you didn't go to art school and you didn't go the right way and do this, but Charon always brought to me people that I needed to make whatever steps I needed to make.
Well, you not only do art, I mean, you do statues too that are just incredible. You know, I'm going to put this on the screen here. This is other work Myron does. You'll see it'll come up here any second. Yeah, here we go. Look at this. I mean, these are statues that you've actually chiseled and carved and cast. I mean, unbelievable.
Yeah, that's a show I did at Cal State Northridge. and
Wow.
that's in the
Your name's right
their
back there, Myron Dyal.
entertainment. Yeah, right. And there's actually 13 of them. There's 6 white ones and 6 black ones, and then a
Wow.
red one. And the black ones are
That's
over
interesting.
further.
Mm.
But these, the beauty of this particular little gallery is that it's all glass on the outside. So the daylight comes through and lights them up. I mean, it's
Sure, I see
it's a
that.
spectacular. It was
See the
it was a
sunlight on it, yeah.
spectacular show, and
Wow, amazing.
so yeah.
Well, it's
I mean,
interesting. You talk
there's
about
also-
13. You look at the symbolism in the United States. The 13, arrows and leaves, and the
Yep.
72 angels and capstone with the all-seeing eye. The symbolism is just stunning when you look at our founding fathers. And again, people, think the United States is just some corporation. Well, it's kind of been turned into that. But I can tell you it was
Yeah.
founded on amazing principles. And when you look at the Constitution, the Bill of Rights, it is, I think it's an attempt to get as universal as you can, even though the politicians and the attorneys have been hammering away at it. It still seems to be holding strong. And it's an amazing place.
When I was in Europe, I was looking at the temples, and almost every temple, Christian, has a plaque, and the plaque has IHVH on it. And IHVH is the tetragrammaton of the Freemasons.
Right.
So every building has that on it. And that shows you the influence. I mean, Mozart was a Freemason.
Yes, you bet he was. Yep.
And a lot of others too, as far as that goes.
It's pronounced many different ways, but it's really interesting how God, or creation, if you will, whatever you want to call it, rains down through the 4 elements. And physicists always laugh at this. I get into conversations with physicists and and quantum physicists, which I have great respect for. But I used to teach a physics class, and I found out really fast how much we don't know. The more I got into physics and acoustics and all this stuff, and I went, wow, this is beyond human comprehension, the study of energy. And when you look at the tetragrammaton, which you were just mentioning, which can come in various different, it can be in Latin, it can be in Hebrew, it can be in English, in many different languages. It's God's manifestation or concretization of spirit into matter. This is a spiritual reality machine.
Absolutely. I mean,
and you're probably the only person I've talked to who has the lucidity of clarity to remember these things and actually consciously assimilate this into a reality that is just as normal as day. That's what I again, when you and I were driving down the freeway the other day into Los Angeles, and you were pointing out all the old, things, and I'm just like, wow, this guy is, I've never met anybody quite like you. It's really, really fascinating.
I think that in my case, it was life and death. Okay.
Yeah.
Not only was I given the responsibility of this soul to deal with, which I did not understand, of course, until way later in my 30s and 40s, I began to kind of get the picture. But the fact was that the energies that surround me all the time. Karen is here now. She's standing right there.
Wow.
And she never goes away, ever. Or she's just an ethereal, like fog, but a really pretty one. And
wow. Amazing.
I didn't know that other people didn't see these things. And when I was very young,
and you got beat
I remember
for it. You got beat for it.
Like my folks after church, we used to go to Forest Lawn in Glendale because they like the art and it's a beautiful place.
That's a very famous cemetery he's mentioning. Huge. I mean, so many celebrities are buried in Forest Lawn. Bob Hope is there.
Well, I'll be buried there. once I die, I'll be buried there. So anyway,
You told me this
um,
incredible story how you got that grave plot that nobody
yeah,
could get. Nobody can get in the forest lawn anymore. I think
no,
Cecil B.
it's sold
DeMille's
out.
buried there. So many people.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, it's 120 years old, Yeah,
Yeah.
but
Almost
so
all
I mean,
Hollywood royalty is there. Yep.
yeah, we were there, and I guess I was about 10, and they were looking at something, and I saw this man, and he called me over, and I said hi, and he said hi, and he asked me how I was. I said okay, and then he said, "How's your grandfather?" And I said, "He's all right as far as I know. I mean, how would this guy know my grandfather?" And
Right.
so we got to talking, and my mother screamed at me, like, "Get over here, come back over here." And I told her, "Mom, I'm talking to
talking to a
this
guy.
man right
Yeah.
here. I mean, he's
And she couldn't
standing
see him.
right there." And then
She
it
couldn't
dawned
see
on me that she could not see him
Yeah.
or hear him. And that was like a satori, a kind of revelation to me, because
Oh, yeah.
it said to me, "Hey, people can't see these things that I see, and only a few can, but most can't."
You bet. It's so interesting what you were talking about before, because you're a rare one who's been exposed to hundreds of neurologists and doctors and examinations and all this left brain stuff. And isn't it interesting how demonically this world has attacked the pineal gland? This is what fluoride does. It calcifies. I have so many great clients that tell me about this stuff, and these doctors are telling me, "Jeff, we're able to now MRI pineal glands." Well, all the stuff you talked about earlier about this tumor in your brain and how the eye assimilates, isn't it interesting when we astral travel or when we're out of body, the same site still exists without the gray matter of the brain. So when we exit these bodies, we still see, hear, touch, and feel, but on different dimensions. So the pineal gland, at least in the gray matter of the brain, it's pretty much accepted by most of the mystery schools that is how consciousness imports into these miraculous meat suits we call bodies, which are pretty astounding. I mean, I got hats off to God. I'll tell you what, this thing, it heals every day. All I got to do is feed it and sleep a little bit. And it seems to be doing all right. You especially at 82 going on 83. I mean, it's amazing. I mean, you have the intellect of a 40-year-old or even younger. It's just amazing, the lucidity of your mind. And the fact that you can remember all this stuff of these dimensions. And it's just like an everyday occurrence. I remember when I first met you, I just went, okay, is this guy for real? And then I listened for a few minutes. I went, yeah, he really is. So it's amazing. And it's so refreshing to have you on, because I talk about this stuff every day. I'm trying to always get everybody, I do readings with astrology, and I'm always saying, people, you are not your astrology. The astrology is just the unfoldment of time in what we call our reality. And you have validated that with just a few stories you've told. And I mean, I could keep you on here for 3 days. In fact, I'd love to get you back again, because you're probably just absolutely full of stories that I think people would love to hear. I want to just take a minute and also tell people about your background in the military. This is you right here. Let me see if I can, I don't think I can draw on it. You probably can't see my cursor, but there's a black arrow. You're the third row down, third in from the left.
Right. Yeah, that's me. Yeah, that's my basic unit at Fort Ord. When I was there in '64. And now, see, there's another thing. I mean, the very fact that I could get into the military shows you how incompetent their screening process is. They've got a soldier standing right there who has seizures, who has visions, and they don't know it. I mean, really, and thank God I didn't go into combat. I went into the Signal Corps. But the fact is that they had no clue that what they had in their little unit there. And
this looks like a scene out of Full Metal Jacket. You sure this isn't out of Full Metal Jacket?
Well,
same time era.
We had M14, so we had Full Metal Jacket, that's for sure. But
Hey, do you
I
know
don't
Nathan Sassover by any chance? You know a guy named Nathan Sassover?
I don't think so.
Oh, well,
But
he's a good friend of mine. He and Stanley Kubrick are very good friends. Nathan's been involved in a lot of incredible stuff, and in Hollywood, and dealing with movies and financing and all kinds of patents. So he's a good friend of mine. We met at the Earth Cafe years ago, and it was amazing because he said Stanley Kubrick called him up when he was making Full Metal Jacket and said, "Nathan, you got any more moviolas?" And he says, "Yeah, I got a couple. So I need them all." So he's had them because they were unfolding the dailies, and they needed more moviolas to cut up everything. So it's funny. I didn't know if you knew him. Just a little trivia there.
I think that a lot of people don't understand that Kubrick was anti-military, anti all of that stuff. He made a very early film with Kirk
Interesting
Douglas,
guy.
and it's an anti-war film right from the get-go. And so is Full Metal Jacket. That's an anti-war film. Everybody gets all upset by Sergeant Harmon, who was actually a real DI, by the way. I remember when I went through basic and they were screaming and yelling and doing. Well, all right. Anybody that's gone through basic has gone through that process. And what they're trying to do is tear down, your old consciousness and rebuild you as a soldier. Because, technically everybody is a killer. If you're in the military, no matter what your MOS is, military occupational specialty, no matter what it is, you're technically a rifleman. And if they don't train you properly, then you can't
strip you down,
pull
just
the
like the
trigger
wolf tearing your face off and rebuild you, right?
Exactly.
Yep.
So Kubrick was trying to say, I'm not supporting this. I'm showing you what happens to people when this occurs. And people just don't get it. They think that this is a pro-military film, and it's not. I mean, that's not it.
I didn't know that.
It's just not.
Wow. Well, look at Eyes Wide Shut. Look at the stuff he was involved with, and Kubrick. Before his deathbed, there's rumors that he said we never went to the moon. So there's a lot. Kubrick was a really interesting guy. So you knew Kubrick, huh?
Yeah, right. And he was a great photographer. That's why his DP stuff is so good. I mean, it's so amazing because every shot is like a photograph. I mean, he was a great photographer. And,
all your great directors actually call movies photographing. They never call it filming. They say, we're going to start, look at Clint Eastwood, another great director. We're going to start photographing. They're not filming, they're photographing.
No, that's true.
Very good point.
So, it's funny, that my life has these sections. There's the military, there's the responsibility. I had 400 people reporting to me when I was in telecommunications. Wow. And
you had top secret
like
clearance.
I said,
didn't you have top secret clearance in the military too? Wow.
Yes, because my dad always had a top secret clearance because he worked with von Braun and he worked at Area 51. And I think I told you that story, that the only reason that we knew that he ever worked at Area 51 is that after he passed away, we were looking through all of his papers, which were just tons of junk. And there was a travel order that was marked top secret at the top. And it was a travel order to Vegas, to that jet that takes you to Area 51. And he didn't destroy it like he was supposed to. It just got, in his tons of papers that he had all over the place. And that's the only reason that we ever knew that he was ever at Area 51. My mother did not know that he ever worked at it. She didn't even know what the Area 51 was, never mind what he did there. And so I
actually saw Area 51 on top of a mountain once. Yeah. Well, I wasn't close to it, but I was up there. I had some prospectors hire me, and they had their $1 million Ranger tells or whatever they were. And I was using interrogation astrology to validate whether they had gold there. And they actually did. And I crawled up to the top of the mountain, and it was way in the distance. I saw this lake bed and these weird craft hovering. And I said, wow. I said, that's and I said, what the hell is that? And the guy said, oh, that's Area 51. He said, I was probably maybe 40 miles from it, 30 miles at the top of that mountain. But you can get that close. I can tell you what I saw. It was weird stuff. I mean, like saucers and very unusual craft.
Well, yeah, I mean, they do a lot of experimental stuff and a lot of spiritual class, and that's one of the reasons why they have all these stories that they make up. They just put lights in the sky and let everybody get all excited about it, and that keeps them distracted from the B-1 bomber, which looks like this bat that's flying around.
There's a guy,
it's spectacular.
Yeah. Oh, it's amazing. Yeah, there's a guy who just put out a documentary debunking, the black ops stuff. And, I can tell you, I used to chart this stuff in the 70s, late 60s, early 70s up in northern Wisconsin, craft that it's inexplicable. I actually had one shut my motorcycle down. Now, you can call them UFOs, you can call them UAPs, you can call them whatever you want, but they're either craft not from here or they're very high-tech military collaborations with other, beings.
Of course, that the Japanese were using balloons with bombs in them that they were sending across the Pacific from the Philippines into the west coast of the United States. And most of them didn't go off, but about 8 or 9 years after the war, there was a family that was up in the mountains, and they found one, and it actually went off and killed them. And so using aerial, they knew they couldn't fly across the Pacific without getting shot down, so they just sent these balloons with bombs in them. There was a lot of weird stuff that was going on in World War II, especially on the German side. I mean, von Braun was.
Yep.
My dad and I used to get in some real conflict about von Braun, and but he just saw him as a god.
What did you think? What did you think? What was your opinion of von Braun?
He was a murderer. I mean, he was a Nazi. He worked for Hitler. He invented the V2, who killed thousands of people. And of course, America wanted him to be on our side after the war, not go to the Russians. Thank God. So instead of putting him in jail or executing him or whatever they want, they just gave him a pardon, and he started working in the Defense Department almost immediately. Yeah, I mean, and a lot of these
Camille's
guys are
uncle. This is a really cool story. I'll be brief. Redstone, which is down in Alabama, right? I was with Camille's uncle before he died. He was in his 80s then. He was walking along showing me the Saturn V rocket systems in Redstone. And he said, yeah, I used to work with von Braun right over there in that building. And I said, what'd you think of him? He said, well, he seemed like a nice guy. He said, I really didn't know him. He didn't talk much other than just unofficial business, but he used to work with them all the time. And they were in development of the rocket stages and all that stuff. So it was really wild to see that. It was like a walk through time, but yeah, this is wild stuff. And your dad, what was his opinion of von Braun?
He loved him. He just,
so did Jack.
I could not refute his reputation. My dad said he was the most brilliant man he ever met. About
that's what Jack McPherson said.
And his designs were impeccable. And if the Russians had got him, then they would have been the ones that were advanced, but they had to rebuild their country. We didn't have to do that. So it gave us an advantage over them in the early stages. But my dad loved the guy. He just worshiped him.
What Jack
so we had a conflict over that. In his mind, von Braun's mind, he's a scientist, and he was given a task. After all, Oppenheimer was given a task, and he did it. And he created the atom bomb, and we really didn't need the atom bomb to end World War II. I mean, that more people died of firebombing in Tokyo than died at Hiroshima and Nagasaki. Firebombing is just as effective as that atomic bomb, especially an atomic bomb, not the one that the H bomb this friend of mine's teacher actually invented. But anyway, the point of it is that they make these things because they're interesting, and then they expect that there's going to be a maturation process in the world that people won't use them.
I'll say one thing: the Emperor of Japan sure got the idea when they dropped when they dropped the atomic bombs. That made him say, "Okay, we're going to surrender because we don't want any more of this."
You know, they almost killed the emperor, the generals. I don't want to talk about World War II too much, but the fact is that when you meet people that are at that level, you know, they're like aliens. They really are. I mean, they're not
removed
really
from
focused.
reality. They're removed from
I mean,
reality.
Einstein was totally removed from reality. I mean, he was so involved with equations in his head, you know, that you know, I don't think that he could even really function in a normal way. I know he could play Mozart because he played the violin, but
I didn't know that. No.
He's a very good violinist, actually. Very
The
good.
guy who interests me is Tesla. Tesla was so amazing. You know, he really was.
Tesla was a phenomenon. I mean, if you
was.
ever thought maybe there was an alien that came to Earth, it might be Tesla.
He might have been,
because he came up with stuff that nobody had come up with. You know, I mean, it's just amazing.
He even talked about the simulation we're in, the reality structures, you know, and which is exactly what you were espousing earlier, you know, with your visions of the cave and the river. I mean, that is exactly the river of death, the underworld that the Egyptians had talked about. And the Masons have a ritual that is very similar to that. Yeah. Wow. Yeah,
they do. Cool. I know it well. So, but you know, the fact is that, you know, that when you have no choice but to follow your bliss, as Campbell would say, then you either do it or you go down the rabbit hole and you're done. Not everybody has to. I mean, there are people who are not, I got to be very careful about how I say this. There are people that are not available for transitioning on any level except the most base and fundamental levels, which is materialism and, you know.
It's where the soul is at that time.
Yeah, there's a famous book called The Transcendentalist Revolt Against Materialism, which Walt Whitman was involved in, and some others. And because they could already see that in the 19th century that's where we were going, to materialism. And
materialism, that's right.
And once you buy into that, then everything becomes secondary to that. And
you're down the rabbit hole.
If you keep your focus, you know, on your own inner being and your own journey, your own personal journey, not the journey of some religion, but the journey. You can be in any religion you want as long as you focus on your own process, your personal process. I don't have any conflict with anyone who is a spiritual person on their path.
Yeah, anybody who believes in God and divinity is good.
Yeah, I couldn't care less. I mean, it's not my responsibility anyway. It's their responsibility. And if it works for them, then it's fine with me. You know, I'm not here, you know, I'm not evangelical. I am not trying to convert anybody to anything. I was born.
That's where the religions ran into trouble, right there.
Yes, that's right. Yeah. That and money, you know, I mean, just imagine what the Vatican is worth. I mean, I was there,
and what they got underneath it in their archives. Oh my God!
That library is well, it's just chock full of, you know, that they had the Dead Sea Scrolls for almost 25 years, and they wouldn't let anybody look at them, and then they finally agreed to let scholars come in and dissect them. And of course, the Dead Sea Scrolls are the only ones who actually talk about what Christ did. The Bible doesn't.
I think it was Stuart Copeland's uncle had been involved with the CIA when they found those. And to give you an idea how sophisticated that was, apparently they rolled one open up on top of some cliff and it blew away. And, you know, somehow the Vatican ended up with all of them.
yeah, that's the truth. And
Stuart Copeland's the drummer for the Police. You know, I think it was his uncle or his father or something in the CIA.
Well, that's funny.
It's interesting. But it ends up in the Vatican. No.
When you walk into the wealth of that place, you know.
I've never been there, but yeah, I know, I've seen it.
I mean, and Florence is even more incredible because that's where all the Michelangelo stuff is. there's a chapel where the famous Michelangelo statues. I mean, one of those is worth $10 billion. I mean, they're just priceless. I mean, if they're selling Van Goghs for 60 million, you can imagine what they're going to sell David for.
Yeah.
So anyway, the point of it is that when you get caught up, I think, in doctrine, then the doctrine becomes your religion and not your own process. And that's the failure of organized
and consciousness,
religion.
Right? That's right.
That's right.
Dr. Carl Wicklund talked about that in a book. Here, I'll just hold it up rather than try and find it. It's called The Gateway of Understanding. This is probably one of the best books I've ever read exactly about what you're talking about. He grappled with, this is a man, Dr. Carl Wicklund, just so people know, and I mentioned him a lot. He, and you and I talked about it when we were going down to Cicada. He ran the Psychical Institute, the original one in Los Angeles. He would take schizophrenic and various different patients with severe mental, cases that couldn't function. And he would depossess them. His wife, Ann Wicklund, was a psychic. He would actually dislodge the spirit with what he calls a Wimhurst generator. And I've shown this before, but it's amazing. High voltage, just like Tesla would use, very high voltage, high frequency, and it would dislodge the spirit. And his wife would take on the spirit and he'd have dialogue. And what he found in literally 30 years of cases, and probably more than that, was most of the disincarnates didn't know that they were even dead. They didn't know. So, people listening to Myron here today, and what we speak about on this podcast, it's all about getting conscious. Where you're at, Myron, you're like 10 dimensions above most consciousness in people. And I'm not trying to elevate you or deify you, but you are. And most people are so rooted in their perception of reality. And this is what Vedic astrology speaks about, is the moon is the manas of the mind. It is the perception of reality, our emotional perception of reality. And what's interesting is that forms when we're knocked out and tied into these bodies. And most people are suppressed, or they won't look outside of that perception of reality until the soul gets more advanced. And this is where reincarnation really becomes an interesting thing. And those souls you saw trapped in that river are souls. There is no time. I always say to people, forget time. Time is a earthly construct. If you took away the rotation of the earth, sunrise, noon, sunset, midnight, even if you're a flat earther, whatever you want to believe, it's still the daily cycles and the annual cycles and the lunations around the earth, meaning the new, full, and quarters of the moon. And when you look at this from a reality standpoint, there is no time. And see, you're so blessed to have stepped out and have all these visions and realities. And most importantly, the realization that you actually have experienced it the way you have. That story you told about going to the edge of the universe and the sound, stunning. I mean, that's now you see where these movies come from, like Thor and these ancient legends that have been told throughout time.
Sure.
We're spiritual beings having a physical experience.
And the intellectual conjecture and debate is really useless. It's only effective as a tool to move your what some people would call your assemblage point. It moves. If, like, let's say that I'm reading the I Ching one day and I'm reading some, and it hits me at a certain place and it moves my assemblage point. That's its only function.
Which is your perception of reality. Yeah, your perception of reality.
And if you can't do that, if you can't be available to move your perception of reality, you're going no place.
That's
fast. You're going to stay in this incarnation. That's right. And you're going to get reincarnated in this same matrix.
You're coming right back. Opinion. That's right. And that's the evil spirits want to bind you here. They play off this etheric energy. This is a soul cauldron. I always say the earth is a big wash machine. We're stuck on spin cycle until we fly out, right? And that's my opinion based on the astrology. And, you know, astrologers look at, oh, you're a Pisces, you're an Aries, you're a Aquarius. Forget all that crap. You're looking at a matrix here of time locked into your perception of reality. Most of the great mystics would teach you want to get out of that. You want to go above the influences of astrology. And this is what the great religions did teach. And what's valuable, a lot of people say, well, then what are you looking at astrology for? Well, sometimes you got to look at the maze you're in to understand you're in it and see this perception of reality, which raises your consciousness. But one of the most important things I want to focus on that you said earlier that I love is the forgiveness. You were beaten mercifully as a child and punished for the psychic abilities that you had and the things you could see, and called and probably ridiculed and, you know, demons and all that. This is so common. You know, it's interesting. I'll tell a story I've never told before. Forgiveness is such an important thing. It is the centerpiece of dislodging the psychic lines of tension that bind the soul. Can anybody listening say that you haven't had somebody piss you off or somebody be mean to you or rude or horrible or sue you or accuse you? Almost all of us have, in one sense or another. Hatred and psychic energy is so dangerous. You know what happened to me when I was, and this is what really made my mother convince me astrology was amazing. I was 16 going on 17, and my father was a raging alcoholic. And he would, back in the 60s, you remember Darabon, he would pop Darabon like crazy because he had a back injury that was so severe. And he would get mean, and I'm talking mean. And it shows up in my astrology chart that I would have a father like this. And in fact, he actually kept my brother in prison for years, my younger brother, for something he didn't even do. All he got was a DWI, you know, and he told all these fake stories to keep him out so that he wouldn't get my grandmother's estate. It's just crazy. Anyways, long story short, I took my brother and my sisters, my brothers and the adopted sister left. And what happened was they went to Oregon to escape because he was threatening to kill them, right? And so I was staying in our house the last night. Well, I slept up on the second floor. And at 3:30 in the morning, I hear this huge bang. And I thought, oh my God, what the hell happened? So I run up to the top of the stairs, and there he is laying with a German Ruger in his hand, blood running out of his mouth. And I ran down and said, oh my God, he shot himself, right? And I said, and I saw the booze bottles empty and all the pill bottles. He had emptied Darabons and Valiums and all kinds of stuff. He was trying to kill himself. So it finally dawned on me a couple of seconds later. Well, wait a minute. I'm the only one home. He would never have a reason to come upstairs except to shoot me. And then I looked at the gun, and the clip was in backwards. He was too drunk and too, delusional to get it in. Thank God for me, right? And he never made it up the stairs anyhow. So long story short, I get on the phone. And you got to remember, we lived in northern Wisconsin. We were 40 minutes from the nearest hospital, and that's if you're hauling ass, right? And so I got on the phone, and I told the doctor on the phone. He said, "Well, what did he take?" And I went and read everything. He said, "He'll be dead before you get him here." He said, "If he ate all that, he's going to be dead unless he throws up." He says, "Get him to throw up," and then he started throwing up on his own. And thank God that saved him, and he's still alive today. Well, you would think I would hate this man for trying to do this to me. And I totally relate to the beatings. I used to get my ass whipped. There's an old saying, Myron, they say in the 1800s, childcare was a bullwhip. And then in the 1900s, it was a belt, right? And now we medicate our children.
Right.
So, and it's kind of true. It's kind of true in some senses. Kids would really get severely punished, when they were young, especially in your year and mine too. Anyways, long story short, that forgiveness, and that's what I wanted to get to. I absolutely forgive this guy and actually have compassion on him. And this is what all the great religions talked about. I don't care what religion you're in, but you release yourself as well as that person, even though what they did might have been totally wrong and they might have, been so mean to you. But the longer I've seen this in lawsuits, I've seen this in fights, I've seen this in cases where I look at the people who call me up. I'm in a lawsuit. My sister took all the money and blah, blah, blah from the estates. You always heard about the states, right? I always say the American legal system is the finest system money can buy. And the attorneys love it when this stuff happens because your misfortune and argument is their business. And what's interesting is this hatred just binds us down on this physical plane so strongly. And that I was so touched when you told that story about Karen telling you that tells me you've really got an amazing guide, angel, partner, part of your soul, whatever. Really, what do you think Karen is?
Well, besides the protector of my original soul, which is one of her main functions, the one that was removed, that's in that painting, her job was to oversee this immense responsibility of this dark soul that had been placed in my consciousness, and to help me navigate a world as dark as this soul was. And now intellectually, I didn't understand any of this. I'm talking from 80 years away. But the fact is that she was always there without judgment. She was my teacher of forgiveness, because I couldn't do anything that she would not just forgive, just ignore. I remember one time somebody asked the Dalai Lama about how he felt about the Chinese, and he said, "I feel fine about the Chinese." And I said, "Well, I mean, I was talking."
Yeah, they slaughtered.
Well,
they would,
if he went back to China, they would execute him tomorrow. Sure. And but he said, "I have no hatred to the Chinese at all. I have no hatred to anything at all." And
smart man.
I was reading that. In a book about him, and I was thinking, wow, this is before my forgiveness. I was thinking, boy, I could never do that. I just couldn't do that. I mean, I can't even forgive, this political system we've got.
Oh yeah. People do hideous things. Yeah.
And so anyway, the point was that Karen always took me on very precise, slow steps that took a lot of time and a lot of energy. You can't have it all. Okay. You can't have everything that you want and also achieve any kind of connecting to cosmic consciousness. You just can't do it. And that's not a judgment on anybody or anything. It's just, it requires an enormous amount of dedication, and even in Christian iconography, it says there's God, there's Jesus, there's man, there's woman, there's dogs, there's cats. They have this hierarchy. And even as immature as that sounds, the fact is it's true. There is the universe, and you're not that big. Okay. I'm sorry about that.
Oh yeah.
You're just not that big, and you're not that important. And 94% of the universe is completely unknown. We don't even know what that energy is, that 94% that we don't know anything about. So anyway, the point of it is that I don't expect the average person who even is, like my parents, they went to church all the time. My mom was, she read a devotional every day. Well, did it really change her? No, I don't think so. And certainly didn't change my dad. I think my dad went along because my mom wanted to go along. And because he was so cerebral with math that that's all he ever thought about. And so, that's why that scripture, many are called, but few are chosen, to go full circle, is so relevant, is because people ask me all the time, well, how do you get to all this stuff? I mean, how can you have these visions and how can you transverse all of this? And I said, well, first of all, you have to do the work. In alchemy, the first principle of alchemy is to do the work. All right. And you do the work alone. That's the alchemist's work alone. That's
Sure.
That's classical Jungian stuff because he was a big alchemist. And in Psychology and Alchemy, he makes it clear that if you're going to be on this path, you're going to do this alone. Now, you can have helpers that come periodically and you'll interface with them and they'll move on.
You have to have a desire.
I remember one time, yeah. I mean, I went to see this spiritual leader, Muktananda, Baba Muktananda in Santa Monica. A friend of mine is really into Hinduism and stuff, and so she took me there. And he didn't speak English
or no?
Yeah, and he didn't speak English, so he had a translator, speaking English. And we got done with it because men were on one side, women were on the other side, and everybody had to give a thing to Baba, and then he feathered you. I mean, that's what he did. Right. So we went back to her place, and she was all, "Oh God, he's wonderful. He's so wonderful." And I didn't get anything out of it. I told her, I'm sorry, I just didn't get anything out of it. So a month later, I'm on the mountain, right, meditating. And who comes to the mountain? Here comes Baba out of a blue light. And he always comes out of a blue light. I didn't know that. I didn't know that until after I read his book. But so Baba came to me out of a blue light, and we worked together for about 6 months. He taught me out of body about all kinds of principles that I didn't really know about. And he wasn't speaking my language. He was downloading information into my head that had nothing to do with language. So, and then one day he didn't come. No, he came and he said, "This is our last session." And he blessed me and all that stuff. And then he left. And I got a phone call when I got home, and he'd passed away in India about that same time.
Oh,
yeah. So the synchronicity between those two acts. So, so I think that first of all, you can have human interactions that are guides for you as long as you kill the Buddha at the end of them and move on. There's a great book called, If You Meet the Buddha on the Road, Kill Him. And then there are people on a spiritual dimension, and people who pray and meditate and stuff, connect to those things. Then there are actual entities that can come to you and teach you things. Then there are teachers, podcasts like this and others that can give you a little information. But when it all comes down to is you still have to accept it and do it,
and do it and relate to it. Yeah.
Well, I mean, if you think about when Christ was talking to the rich young ruler, Nicodemus, and Nicodemus said, "So what do I have, Father, what do I have to do to inherit the kingdom of God?" And he said, "You have to sell everything that you own, give it to the poor, and follow me." And everybody misread that scripture, saying that if you have money, you can't be spiritual.
Yeah, you're a bad
That's
guy,
not what Christ was saying. He was saying that you're more interested in that money than you are in this process. That's
or
what
in the material realm, right? The material realm.
Yeah, so you can be rich and still be spiritual. Okay.
Yep.
And
sure.
So I think if there's for instance,
it's where you place your heart, which is another great truth.
It's possible. It's possible if I had not been hurt in the military and wounded and lost my music, that my process would never have matured. I had to find an alternative to music.
How were you? How were you injured in the military? How were you injured?
Purely on a freak accident. I was
in Vietnam for a while, weren't you?
Yeah. I was sent to I was called up out of the reserves to go to Fort Ord because they had sent a soldier there that they sent to Vietnam who was going to do, I was going to do what he was doing, which is copying code and doing crypto and doing key and voice and all that stuff. And I did 16 hours on, 16 hours off. And this is 1969. And so I'm minding my own business, and they said, look, it's only going to be a few months. It's just TDY, they call it, temporary duty. And then we'll send you back to your reserve unit. And I went, okay, all right. My wife, of course, went ape shit. But the fact was, she was really mad that I was going to be gone again, because I never seemed to be around. So I went to Fort Ord, and unfortunately for me, the guy that they had sent there was killed. And so I got called into this colonel's office, and believe me, you don't meet very many bird colonels when you're a PFC. And he called me into his office, and he said, look, we got some bad news for you. And that is, you're going to have to go to Vietnam. We're going to need you to spend some time there doing what you're doing here, but you're going to do it there, but you're going to do it in Saigon. And I went, great. That's just great. Thanks, Colonel.
Right in the heart of everything, huh? Wow.
Yeah, and so I went to Vietnam and did my job there, and I had to have a top secret clearance in order to do that job, because I'm listening to commanders, 2- and 3-star generals, talking to commanders in the field, and everything they said was classified. Everything.
I'll bet.
I mean, it's still classified. So I don't talk about much of it at all, because I got into trouble with the free press. Back in the 60s, when I got out, I was talking to this reporter, and I was telling her some things that she was asking me about the war. And I said, don't use my name. Just say a soldier says, don't use my name. Yeah. So she put my name in the damn paper. So who comes to my door?
Didn't you have the FBI coming to your house and your neighborhood constantly researching you?
Yeah, and they knocked on the door, and they threatened me. They said, look, when you got out of the military, I had to sign like stacks of paper. No, I won't do that. No, I won't do that. No, I won't say this. No, I won't say that. No, I won't do this. Yeah. And so they threatened me. They said, if you do this again, you could go to Leavenworth, and we would make sure that happens. So keep your mouth shut. Yeah. And believe me, I was intimidated. And so I never said, I even denied that I was ever in the Army. I denied that I was ever in the Army. When people would say to me, I thought you were a soldier. No, I was never in the Army. No, I don't know what you're talking about. I was never,
You scared the hell out of you.
So anyway, so one day, this captain came in, and he said, we have to go on this mission, and we're going to need you to transmit some data from a helicopter that we're going to be in. And I went, I don't want to go into the field, sir. He said, we can't tell you where we're going to go, and this is a top secret mission, and I can't tell you what it was. But the fact is, we went on the mission. And we were doing what we were doing, which I can't talk about. And and something went off. It was either a landmine or a shell. I don't know which. And
that's how you got injured.
I was knocked out flat, and I woke up in a helicopter, and they'd already given me morphine, and that's a great drug. I'll tell you right now. And there is a funny anecdote here. So I'm laying on a gurney next to all these other people, and the doctors are saying to these other doctors, all right, go see which ones are recoverable and the ones that are just going to die, and then just give them morphine and let them die. And then the priest was coming, and the priest came to me and was giving me last rites. And
did you have any out of body experience during that time?
No. And so the priest was giving me last rites, and the doctor said, not him. He's not dying. It's that guy next to him that's dying. So I got kind of freaked out that I was getting last rites, but I didn't know about it anyway. I was so drugged up that I really didn't know much about it. But it broke my arm.
What these poor soldiers go through with the weaponry and the bombs, and oh my God. I mean,
it's indescribable, and I don't even want to go there.
I bet.
I mean, it's war is the most terrible thing that that you can ever get yourself into.
You bet. And the spirits and the bankers seem to love it.
There's nothing too good. There's nothing good about it. Not a thing.
Nope.
Well, anyway, so I went back to the hospital in Saigon, spent a few weeks there, and then they sent me back home. And then I was at Wilshire Hospital as an outpatient for a while, and then that was the end of that. But and I was in the reserves for 6 years. I was called up for the Watts riots. Got shot at in the Watts riots. Never mind in Vietnam. And because we were protecting the firemen who were trying to put out the fires, and they were getting shot at. So our job was to protect the firemen. So the 60s was crazy time. And
you bet
everybody kind of like now, everybody kind of goes nuts, you know, and it was dangerous. And I was on a lot of drugs at the time. And it's a long story. We don't have time for it. But the point is that when the 60s were over and I got off the drugs,
I think the CIA was totally involved with bringing in a lot of those psychotropics out. And in fact, if you've ever heard about all the stuff with Jim Morrison and a lot of the psychedelic era that all went on in Laurel Canyon, you know, that's a lot of stuff interesting going on there.
Especially Laurel Canyon.
Yeah,
there's a famous house that's not there anymore. That used to be really Spook City. I've been to that house. It's really Spook City. But anyway, I think they tore it down finally. But
Houdini's house was over there. The foundation of Houdini's house is still there. Yeah.
Yeah. Right. Yeah. And those old places. I mean, I did a show with Clive Barker. I don't know if you know who that is, but
no.
Clive Barker he did all the Hellraiser films. He's really a famous writer of horror fiction.
You know Whitley Strieber too, don't you? You're good friends with Whitley Strieber too, aren't you? Yeah.
Yeah. Right.
Amazing,
But Barker and I did a show together at Otis College of Art, and it was called Two Madmen. That was his title, not mine. And so he put his art up on one side, and I put my art up on the other side, and then people could see the juxtaposition between the two of us. And and everybody tries to put us together, but the fact is that his art is very demonic and mine is not. I mean, it may look dark, especially yours looks very
angelic. It's always has a spiritual message.
Well, the new stuff does, but the old stuff was pretty spooky. I mean, this angel behind me, for instance, you know, I mean, that's a beautiful image, but I used to have some pretty dark images in the years ago that
I love this show. I think it's beautiful. This is such a beautiful painting. Really nice.
Yeah, I mean, see, now that's from.
I love how you have the little angel kissing another one in the inside of the moon there. It's pretty well.
Yeah, there is that's a kind of thing you can either see or not see depending on who you are. You know, the thing about it is Karen came to me and said, "Okay, we're going to change the style of your painting again because it has evolved, and these paintings are only for representations of Zelkon. That's all they are. I won't, after this series is over, there's going to be 50 of these paintings. There's 20.
And that's that planet that you were brought to in the constellation of
Orion.
Orion. Yeah, that's it. Wow.
Yeah, right. And
there's so much to the stars in the heavens and these constellations that are encapsulated in the old lore. That's why I love studying the ancient astrology. They literally have the angels and the archangels, the spirits, the intelligences within them. And this is like hierarchical. I don't know if Karen's exposed you to any of that, but we're in a matrix here of free will and the soul. This is why the topic of forgiveness you brought up before is so important. It's so central. And you are so blessed to be brought down that river of the demonic forces, and then seeing all the entrapped souls, and they're entrapped by their own consciousness. If there's one thing, Myron, I could ever do, and this is why I love doing this show. People may say it's long, but I tell people you should listen to this show because you've brought some amazing enlightenment. People need to realize that they need to get out of their own heads. Not that I'm here to tell anybody what to do, and I'm speaking for myself as well. And that is that literally when we realize we have been lied to, and I'm not blaming the religions, but in some cases, in a little bit I am, because they've been politicized on top of real truths. And people, this is why, I had a conversation yesterday. I said, why do people want these readings so much? We're all looking for truth, and we're looking for some explanation for the insanity that we're locked into. The insanity is us. It's our consciousness. And I think what you brought here today is an enlightenment to, there is a reality, if you open up to it, that is so much more vast. I showed this diagram all the time. This is one of my favorite diagrams to talk about, because this particular diagram, let's see if I can find it here, is the 4 worlds. And these are so much, this diagram couldn't even begin to talk about how complex it is. The dimensions you've been speaking about are the astral planes and the Yetziratic worlds, which they claim there could be 49 parallel universes and 49 subdimensions in each one. The same thing in the lower astral planes. Once you get out of the Yetziratic worlds, that's where the so-called upper divine heavens are. The upper worlds of the divine souls and the really, truly ascended masters are way up here. And I can't even fathom what they're like. But this diagram I actually put together from a series of documents in the ancient worlds of, Egypt and Kabbalah and all that stuff. And I think it's true. And notice there's a tree of life beneath the earth. That is that subterranean hell, if you will. They actually say there's 7 halls of heaven, 7 halls of hell in these lower worlds. And this stuff gets so deep. One of the guys that I really liked, his name was Rabbi Fatea. He has stories in here where he would take disincarnate trapped souls that were in people, possessing people. And what he would do is he would actually cut the soul. There's stories in this. People read this book. Chapter 80 is 200 pages long of spiritual exercises he did, cutting evil portions of souls for reincarnation and allowing the upper portion that's more purified to go on. This is all talked about in the Sha'arei HaGilgam and in many other texts, particularly in the Vedas, where it talks about there's 5 layers to the soul. You have the conscious mind, which is just the interface, which you have transcended, in my opinion. You've actually transcended that. You don't know what a blessing that is, because you can actually remember. And through Charon and your assimilation of logic, you figured out that, hey, I'm just an avatar. Well, guess what? I think we all are. We're all just avatars.
I think you're right.
Of the upper soul.
I think you're right.
I don't know if I'm right. I think that's truth. I never try to be right, Myron. I just try to portray truth.
I mean, it really doesn't matter right and wrong. The truth is what you experience is what you experience. And that's what's essential. Like, when I met my allies, besides Charon, I have 12 allies. And I didn't even know they existed. And I was in a park in Oregon and in Ashland. And one morning I got up early and I went to meditate. And I was meditating. It was a foggy morning. And all of a sudden I saw these riders. They were black, on black horses, and they had black robes, and they had skull faces, and they were riding down, and they came to this fire pit that I was sitting in.
Wow.
And a big fire pit that was used for social stuff. And so one of them came to me and was kind of the leader and said, don't be afraid. Just wait. And I said, okay, I'll wait. And they said, we don't look like this. That this is an amalgamation that you're making. This is your unconscious projection of us. We don't look like this. And I said, well, what do you look like? And so they took off the skull masks and the blacks and all of that stuff. The horses went away, and they were pure energy, just pure light. And there were 12 of, there still were 12 of them, but they emit, they were just so loving. The love that was manifest from what I thought was darkness. So my ego was projecting darkness on something that wasn't dark at all.
Right.
And that's how I was seeing them. And that's how people get confused between what's good and what's not good, and what's angelic and what's demonic and all the rest of it. Because what
you're
really
talking about something so
yourself.
important. It's the samskaras. This is what the Tibetan lamas, the Vedas, and the yogis had spoken about, and the Egyptians and the Masons. The samskaras are thought form elementals. They come out of the third eye chakra. They're connected to the pineal and the brain and all that happy stuff. But the bottom line is we get imbued with all these egoic, you could say, belief systems. And what's so wonderful about this podcast is you're actually speaking about getting out of that. You rise. It's almost like an airplane that takes off on a foggy day. The only thing they got is their instrumentations, which is kind of like the five senses, right? Well, when your consciousness gets higher and your vibration gets higher, pretty soon, boom, you're up above the clouds. Now, all of a sudden, you can see everything, you see? So things become clearer. And those dimensions keep going up and up and up, I think, beyond anything we can imagine. And this is what you're speaking about. And it's very complex to verbalize and speak about this stuff, but it's so fascinating. I've had, things trying to attack me when I was a little kid, and an angel would drive it away, or some silver being, so we all have had stuff like this. And it's so important to get in touch with this childlike veil breaking that we all can do, and it's so amazing you can do this at your age. So amazing. I love it. This has been an amazing podcast.
If you don't come as a little child, you're not going to see the kingdom of heaven. And
that's right.
And obviously what that scripture means is that you can't use your intellect to get there. You just can't. You're not smart enough.
You cannot.
I remember I was watching a program on physics, and there was a Nobel Prize winner of physics on this program. And they were saying, hey, do you think that we're close to understanding the universe? And this Nobel Prize winning physicist, he was British, I can't remember his name. He said, no, we're not smart enough. We're so far away from being smart enough that we don't have a clue about what we're doing. This is
that's right. You remember Sir Francis Crick, right? Crick and Watson. They broke the genetic code, and they got the Nobel Peace Prize, and everybody, oh my God, we're going to know everything, right? I think it was Crick that got up and he said, maybe. He said, just maybe in 1,000 years we'll figure out just what the hell we did.
Yeah, that's what this guy said too.
Yeah,
I think that people that are really on a higher level, without their ego, whether they're physicists, mathematicians, scientists, just people, priests, whatever they are, once they let go of the illusion of this world, because it's all illusion anyway.
It's the Maya,
so as soon as they let go of this illusion, no matter how you participate in it, they all go up a step, and they realize it is all illusion, and we don't know anything about any of it. We're just guessing that these things that we think are true. Now, some of them are experiential, like mine, and some of them are not experiential, and some of them are intellectual, but the intellectuals are not going to do the job. If you don't experience this stuff directly with your heart chakra, you're not going no place.
That's right.
That's just the way it works.
That's exactly
that's
right.
not a judgment. That's just the way it is.
Yeah. It is. It's so interesting. You mentioned that. Let me put up something here that's quite fascinating here. The Earth, I always say, is an astrological time machine. And there's a diagram that I use here that actually shows some of the mechanics. This is the sun and the moon and the Earth. Let me see if it comes up here. Yeah, it's just loading in right now. And It's interesting because the nodes, the eclipse points of the moons are known as Rahu and Ketu in Vedic astrology. It's also known as the north and south nodes. They're not, you've been around communications, a bus or a nodal point is where things join. And what's so fascinating about this is that the nodes of the moon have a very mysterious energy to them. And what's really amazing about your chart, for some reason this diagram's not loading, but here, let me do it this way. I'm gonna show you something about your chart, because I have to watch my time. I'm looking here and I've got to go fairly soon. I could literally talk to you for a week, and I definitely want to have you back. And what I appreciate about you is the way you can describe and articulate these things in a common sense fashion, because everyone thinks they got to join some club or religion or some secret society. I find most of those are the highway to hell. Not that some of them don't give a lot of good things and knowledge, but I always like to say, be in this world but not of it. And I have to say, like, here, I want to show you something. I'm now sharing the screen, so it's going to look kind of weird here, but let me show you something just exemplary in your Vedic astrology. See, this is you right here. Now, this might not make a heck of a lot of sense to people, but this is the Eastern horizon in astrology. You can see this, right? Can you see this, Myron? Yeah. Okay. So this is kind of heady, because astrology is the same way. It's heady stuff. So you were born with the moon and Mars besieging the ascendant, which in plain English means a lot of physical pain and emotional pain. But what's so fascinating is you hit that moon dosha right when you see there's something, and it relates to the moon. And I don't want to get too heady here in astrology because this will take a long time, but I'll just be brief here. These are called the doshas, and there's many of them, but they're called time lords. You see, you actually hit the moon major period. It's called the Mahadosha from 3 years old to 13. You hit Mars major period from 13 to 20. You probably went through hell in your teenage years. That was not an easy time, was it? Yeah. See, and then you hit Rahu at 20 to 38. Then you hit the Jupiter period from 38 to 54, and you hit Saturn from 54 to 73. Now, these you can't just look at as total descriptions. The astrology is just like everything else. It's very complex. But you were born, see, these are primary directions. This looks like Swahili on the screen. But what's interesting is right when you had the coma, literally your moon was releasing over the ascendant. And you ended up going into just an incredible journey from 1950 to 51 forward. And that's corroborated. And, what I try and do in these readings is keep it in plain English, because a lot of people are really into astrology. They really like looking at the details and the cycles. You've got the progressed moon in the 12th house, and it's going to cross your ascendant literally the spring of 2026. And I can promise you that is going to be even more enlightening. There's probably a lot more coming from you in terms of paintings, and you're writing books, and tell people where they can find your website and everything. How can they find out about you, more about you and your art?
Yeah, the website is basically myrondyal.com. It's really simple.
MYRON.
The book is already
DYAL. Yeah.
DYA. Yeah, .com. The book is already there. It's already on. It's already up. You can read it anytime you want. I don't charge for it. You can read it, but I'm going to actually have that printed and next year it'll come out as a book. It's called The Boy That Nobody Wanted, and that's the title. And it explains by all of these experiences that I went through. I mean, I have a complete chronology of every experience I ever had, whereas my avatar life, I don't remember much of it at all. I remember a few things, but not much. But all of the stuff on the spiritual side, I recall it absolute. And anything that I put in the journals from 1978 on, I go back to those journals and look at it, and there's still stuff to work on. Well, anyway,
your mother went through a hard time, didn't she? Your mother went through a hard time, didn't she? You know,
I don't
emotionally it
know.
shows.
I'm not sure. She
She might
was
not open
pretty
up to
rough
you,
on
but
me.
yeah,
I
she
mean,
went through
she,
hard times with
she
the
came
chart shows.
from 14 children. She was the second
Wow.
youngest, and my dad came from 10
That's a
children.
tribe.
So
Wow.
I've got aunts and uncles all over the South. I mean, they're all over the South. And
Yeah.
the karma of that group is not good. They had slaves back in the
Yeah.
1860s, 50s, and 40s.
Yeah.
And remember, I'm only 2 generations away from the Civil War.
Yeah, you are.
Because my grandfather was born in 1881, all
Wow.
right, and his father was born in the 1840s. So
Right.
that's just 3 generations, all right? And so it's, and we
Yeah.
also have Native American blood in us. I don't even want
Wow.
to tell you what they used to call it. They used to have a name for it. And the N-word is part of it, and red N-word is what they used to call it.
Yeah.
And that blood is in me. There's no question. There's DNA there from those Indians.
Well, there's an old saying. They say consciousness raises funeral by funeral, right? Which is incarnation by incarnation, right? So,
yeah, I guess.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, I just think that you know, if you're called to be on this journey, then you should give it as much energy as you would give anything. And if you're not, then go play golf. You know, have a nice life, because you know you're not going
have
to
a
go
nice life
anywhere.
and
So
live your reality, right?
Yeah,
And a lot of people are doing that.
Business. Yeah. Sure, I've lots of business friends that's all they do. They like football. They like playing golf. They go to the clubs.
Oh yeah.
You know, we had all the hotels in Las Vegas.
And there's nothing wrong with that.
They were my customers.
That's their perception of reality.
No, I mean, that's their life. I'm not judging them for their life. No. They weren't called to do what I'm doing. In fact, they didn't even know that they didn't know their partner was a mystic. I would never.
Right.
No one
and they might
knew
think you were nuts if you told them. Right.
Yeah. Oh yeah. In fact, until I did the first show, Primordial Images of a Modern Mystic, and it made the papers. I remember my a colleague came to me and he goes, "Is this you they're talking about in this news article?" And I said, "What news article?" And he said, "Well, there's 3 of the papers in Orange County reviewed this show at Grand Central Arts Center, and there's like 75 works, and they had pictures of the sculptures there and paintings." And I said, "Well, yeah, that is me." And that was the first time anybody ever found out that I had epilepsy, because I would never tell any of them that I ever had that. And of course, that was the end of our relationship. We decided to break up. And so we kind of had a divorce, and they bought me out of my partnership. And then I left that and went into art full time. And I was like 63, I think it was, when I finally just shuffled off this mortal coil of telecommunications. And went into art full time. And art's just a business like any other business. But the thing about my art was that no one had ever seen any images that looked like my images. That's the key to success in the art business. But anyway.
Well, look at you. This is you and I at Cicada. And when you get suited up, I would say you look more like a CEO of a company than you do, of somebody who would be a mystic. So interesting stuff.
Believe me, I've got 17 suits like that are in my closet that I never wear.
Oh yeah, when we picked you up, I went, "Is this Myron?" I mean, you look like a CEO of a company. He's got a $2,000 suit.
I was. So I mean, that's the costume of the day. The only place
you've
that
had
you
so much
wear
contact with so many unique people in the business in California here, back when California wasn't being destroyed by this clown that we have running it now. But not to get into politics. But
But anyhow, the thing about it, the way I treated everybody that I ever met is that I always treat everybody the same. I don't care who they are. I don't care if it's the president of the United States. I don't care who it is. As far as
Right.
I'm concerned, they're just a person like anybody else. And if we connect, we connect. If we don't connect, we don't connect. And I don't judge them, and if I don't care if they judge me or not. And that happened in the military too. I was not intimidated by the sergeants who were screaming and yelling and ranting and raving, and part of the initiation process. I just don't take that stuff serious. I don't care about
Shakespeare.
it.
I think Shakespeare said it best. He said, the whole world is a stage and we're the actors. And boy, was he right about that. He really was. I mean, and when you think about that, that's such a true statement. And the Maya that you were speaking about before, really, I always joke around with the yogis in India. I say, well, drop a brick on your foot, pal, and call me on the 1st of the month. It's not a Maya. It's very real. Have a medical condition. You're going to feel it. Go run your car into a tree. There's consequences on this physical plane, but it is really, truly a movie we're playing. And I think, when you look at Hollywood and you look at our world, all of us are living lives in our families and our interactions, and we have relationships that go good, bad, and all this. It's really a movie, and it's our reaction to it that I think really binds us here so much more heavily. And the pain and the suffering and the things everybody feels is our connection egoically to it all. And it's such a blessing to have you come on this podcast and reaffirm the stuff I love to talk about all the time, because I'm always trying to get people out of their heads with astrology. Astrology is accurate and they love it in readings, but I'm always saying this is the road you're on. That's all it is. You're the driver, and you don't even realize, neither do I, and does anyone else, that how much more expanded we are, that this little car we're driving called our lives is really just that. And it's very important. And it's a reason for it. And I think, every soul is extremely important. There's an old saying, God was actually approached by one of the upper angels, apparently the seraphims or the cherubims and the thrones. They said, what the hell do you love these humans for? They're horrible. They kill each other. They don't believe we're, even in existence. They don't believe in creation at all. And why do you, nurture these and send all these angels and creational forces to keep this world going? And God said, because they come back. They come back with an expanded consciousness that no angel will ever get. So humans might be more blessed than we know, and other beings too, that we were the Q-tip in a mud puddle. We got dipped down here and found out what the mud puddle is really about, and found out, hey, that's really not the way to go. You don't want to be one of those souls imprisoned in that cave that you went by. And that's so amazing that you told that story. And
I remember when I saw all those other incarnations of myself on Zelkon in other dimensions and other times, that kind of reinforced my attitude about the Matrix. The very fact that I could exist in 1,000,000 years from now, or 10,000 years ago, or yesterday, or present day. And
there is no time.
That was a shocking realization to see all of these duels, Charon, another Charon, and another person who was me. And so
49 dimensions and 49 subdimensions. Wow.
Yeah, it opened my chakra to this universal consciousness that exists everywhere and nowhere, and has always existed. And that's I don't like to use the word always, but let's just say it just exists. We'll just leave it at that. So and it's all for a reason. For some reason, God seems to pull it back in. He yanks in the rug, and everything gets destroyed and recreated. There's something really magical. I mean, truly magical. I mean, when you think about creation itself, even what happens in a child's womb, or a seed in the ground, or an animal in whatever, gestation, vehicle it uses, stunning. It's stunning. It's spirit concretized into matter. It's absolutely breathtaking. Myron, I got to run, but man, I got to say, I thoroughly enjoyed you on the show, and thank you so much for coming on. And I hope people listen to this and listen to the stories you've told, because they're true.
And this is, I think, a real conscious expanding thing. And I hope they buy their books, or your books, I mean, and or your book, and check it out, your journey. Because I think when we study other people's dramas and realize, wow, that crap storm was his and my crap storm's mine, and we start becoming less reactive and more objective to the degree that we can.
It helps.
With our
it helps to know that there are other people that were on this path too,
Yeah.
And what they did,
I'm
maybe
not
they
the
were
only
successful,
victim,
maybe they weren't.
Right.
Yeah, I'm not the only person who's ever done this. I mean, there's a lot, there's been thousands of them, like all the Vedas you were talking about.
We've been to this barbecue millions of times. They claim our solar system alone goes around, that there's a great year every 25,000. Some say it's 900 years. Some say it's 700 years. But that's the great year. How many times could you incarnate in just short of 26,000 years, whatever the number is?
Right.
That's a lot.
That's true.
Yeah, and we seem to leapfrog through these different time epochs of what we call civilization and evolution, which is we're really time travelers. We really are. It's amazing. So, my friend, thank you so much for coming on, and it was a blessing to have you.
My pleasure.
You bet.
And anytime you want me back, I'll be glad to come back.
Oh, we're definitely gonna have you back. I mean, I love it. We could go on talking forever. Well, thank you so much again for your time, and I had just a wonderful time. Thank you so much. Bye now.
Yeah, me too. Take care, pal.
You bet. You take.